Okay, good morning. Um, this wasn't really that planned. Surprise, surprise. I kind of like to do live streams Saturday mornings when I can, when I have the opportunity. The house is still quiet. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And I usually have things on my mind. I need to catch up on PBK's live stream, which I listen to in bits and pieces because I was at work, and I need to I don't know, I need to think. I listened to a video this morning. It was relatively short, of PBK talking about it's members only, but I think he'll probably release it broadly, I would think, entitled "Don't Take the Bait, Learn from Jesus." And it's kind of on, I guess he uses two things. He uses Peugeot's video of, what is it? Peugeot's video of weaponizing ambiguity, talking about the Olympics, which I have not seen. And then he plays a little bit of Sam Tripp and Bethel's conversation about, which I haven't followed either, Megan, what's her name? Megan Bashon, talking about, I don't know, like political people weaponizing Christianity and trying to like overtake evangelicalism, and it's kind of like pick a sides ism. You know, Peugeot talks about this in his video, which Paul highlights, and this is the take a side kind of a thing. And this is really what I mean. What's up, Peter? By my little term, the exclusivist religion of the right side of history. And it's obviously a play on, that little phrase is like, well, at least, or the somewhat pride or false security people have of being on the right side of history. And it reminds me of this little phrase that I heard once that I really love, when I don't really like to tell people where I heard it from or who said it, because of the very tendency that we have of pick a sideism, of, and what Paul is getting at and don't take the bait, and what Peugeot is getting at and don't take the bait, which is essentially the culture war, the exclusivist religion on the right side of history. But there's this quote, which is the last acceptable remaining form of bigotry, so a lot of adjectives, is against those with whom we disagree. And I think that's right. That's just another way to say essentially identitarianism. You set up a line rooted in an abstraction, a definitional understanding of something. This is where I've been saying Paul made that video on emissarianism, riffing off of Ian McGilchrist, and right brain, left brain stuff, map territory. And so you just take a definitional understanding, Sam, good morning, and you say, okay, this side or this side. I mean, whatever. The obvious political American culture war is like Republican, Democrat, Kamala Harris, Trump, whatever. And what's up, Pete? I need to catch your whole live stream thing too, because you were on there a long time with KL and PVK yesterday. But and you say like, okay, this side good, this side bad. It's this weird Jonathan Haidt kind of phenomenon, and happiness hypothesis phenomenon of this came up in the live stream actually, because Jonathan Haidt describes a conservative as the one who has a disgust psychologically, is one, and sociologically is one who has a disgust impulse at the other. So the person at the wrong side of history, right? The person who's on the wrong side of the culture war. That person, like, ugh, like they're gross, they're disgusting, you could say evil, wicked, wrong, whatever. And this is the hard tension, again, of like that I try to get into with personalist knowing is like you can is it possible to disagree with someone about an abstract idea of this culture war, exclusivist religion, on the wrong side of history, that don't take the bait binary of which side of this line do you stand on, and not be disgusted by someone who disagrees with you? And people would say, well, I don't know. I think a lot of people would say, depending on certain topics, that's possible, but on other topics, it's just not possible. And I haven't even gotten to Rod. Good morning, Phlebas. Yeah, well, Phlebas Keller, one of my favorite Keller things that I mention a lot. I should just look it up and play it on here. I might, and I need to start talking about DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. But is Tim Keller a long time ago? I think it's a Gospel Coalition thing, which he's on there with Matt Chandler and Michael Horton. Matt Chandler, I tried to listen to a Matt Chandler interview the other day with somebody who was telling me about it, McMo. I still can't do Matt Chandler. He's just he's great in a lot of ways. He just has little ways that he speaks that are just like cultural tells for me, where like he reminds me too much of my Young, Restless, and Reformed days, and I can't do it. I can do it, but I don't like to do it, and I don't do it that long. Anyhow, but Keller had in that video, it's How to Disagree. I'm going to look it up and queue it up because I don't want to watch it yet. Oh, there it is. It's just like automatic in my search history. How to Disagree. So we'll play that in a little bit, but so something I've been thinking a lot about is this dialectical behavioral therapy. I've been going down, it's like my new rabbit trail going down the deep well. And it's essentially like I did a community post on YouTube where I have a video of Marshall Linehan, who is the creator and of DBT, and it's so good. The video that I play is so good, but there's a couple, I might cue them up too. There's a couple shorter videos where she describes because dialectical, let's look it up. Dialectical is is one of those words where she was saying in that thing that she wanted to entitle her book something dialectical behavioral therapy, but the publishers wouldn't let them, so they made her entitle it cognitive behavioral therapy, because they just said if you put dialectical, it'll just turn people off. So like dialectical is pertaining to dialect, logically reason through the exchange of opposing ideas, or okay, no, be quiet, Discord. So refers originally to a dialogue between people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to arrive at the truth through the reasoned argumentation. And but you could even think of it as like, I often think about it with like it's rooted back in Socratic method. It's rooted in an emergent articulation of a new articulation, a deepening understanding of something through a contradiction, through a dialectic, through dialogos. Can we come to mutual and greater understanding, even if we don't necessarily agree about all the detail? Is like through that process, can we come to a greater understanding and maybe a deepened and greater relationality? And I'm excited to hear about this, Chad. He says, I had a massive revelation this morning. This dialectical behavioral therapy reminds me so much of AA stuff, Chad, in a lot of ways. So anyhow, yeah, and Rod says, yeah, it's the only treatment protocol to show any promising results for those with borderline personality disorder. Yes, and because I was talking to Rod about this yesterday. Yes, that's true from what I know, but also it's like this is how it relates to AA too. Is people with borderline personality disorder are so difficult to deal with that she was through the suffering of her own suffering and of of dealing with the suffering of clients, that tension, that conflict, that difficulty, she learned and evolved, and there emerged this therapeutic model out of that pain and suffering. And it does help, like evidentially, empirically studied, using empirical studied things. Because in that video, that longer video that I posted in my community thing, she's constantly talking about it's very evidence-based, T-Rod. And she's done lots of studies on it, and she constantly tells people, like, look at the evidence, look at the evidence, look at the evidence. You don't believe me? Come here. I'll show you. I'll prove it to you. Look at the evidence. And even like suicidality, it's one of the only effective ways of treating people with constant suicidality, and at least therapeutic model. And but I was saying this to Rod, and I was talking about my wife with this too. It's almost though that people with borderline personality disorder are so extreme that like you're forced to do, you get desperate. And so you'll do something like Alcoholics Anonymous. You'll actually follow the steps. You'll actually do the work because you're so desperate, because you're like, it's either this or I'm going to die. Like I'm suffering so much because I have such sensitivity and hyper emotionality that like I can't function in the world. My relationships are like I'm suffering, and everyone around me is suffering. And so you're forced to actually do these steps of dialectical behavioral therapy. But the thing is like these things I've just seen, these would benefit anyone. There's tons of people who aren't well in our society who just don't have such extreme emotions that they are almost graciously forced to follow something that makes them well. But then oddly, like an alcoholic who actually does the steps, they can become psychologically and mentally and spiritually and physically so well from what they learn through the steps that they then surpass the health of someone who's culturally successful, because they just don't have such extreme emotions that they've found all sorts of coping mechanisms to help them deal with their suffering. Yeah, exactly. They're sometimes referred to as emotional burn victims. I mean, it's a very complicated thing, but dialectical behavioral therapy is really pretty simple. And so in the video, so I do want to play some of Marsha Linehan's videos, and I do want to play this Tim Keller video to root back on that. It's like how to disagree with people, because these things are interrelated. Dialectical behavioral therapy and how to disagree are interrelated, and it's related to the culture war. This is like a bigger mosaic vision thing. How to disagree with someone and to not have that conservative disgust factor. This is almost like that, and it's related to Jonathan Haidt's book, that whatever the title is or the subtitle is, like how do good people disagree about things, and it's related to politics, which is related to culture war. And it's related to Christ and Antichrist. It's just how these things always emerge. It's related to Tom Holland stuff of like the secular West being Christian, and even like the woke people using, what's the term? It's a the kind of death ritual is that and because that's Christ and Antichrist. The West is fundamentally Christian, and so then you put at the top of the hierarchy victim protection, and then you scapegoat Girard and demonize and culture war those who don't put the victim at the highest thing that then you'll sacrifice everything for, and a malevolent mother thing. Like all of this stuff is related. But how do you disagree with people? Keller and the dialectical thing is it's rooted in relational ontology and personalism. That's why I'm talking about personalist knowing and related to dialectical behavioral therapy, because that's what the dialectical behavioral therapy is about, is whoever you have a conflict with, you have this simultaneous reciprocity of seeming opposites. You have to acknowledge that two opposing things are true at the same time. It's very Taoist, which is very Christian. St. Maximus, the identity of identity and non-identity. And so you have to acknowledge that what this person is experiencing is real. Their suffering, their symptoms, their extreme emotional reaction to something that seems ridiculous to you because you don't relate and have that same reaction. There's something true in it. Can you see the seed of truth in it, even if it's not completely properly integrated? And that's all a spectrum thing. Like somebody who has borderline personality disorder is just like on this end of the emotional spectrum. And just because you don't have that exact same reaction to something doesn't mean that they're not feeling something that's true. This is the whole facts don't care about your feelings. Then that's why that's like the most extreme version of being in the two poles in dialectical behavioral therapy of reasonable mind and emotional mind. And they say the integration, the overlap between those two things is wise mind. And that's where you try to be. But you have to simultaneously acknowledge two things: full validation of their experience, and they're very careful of saying this, which doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean you agree with them in the abstract reasoning, rational mind thing, but you fully validate them, which is basically just saying the relationship is primary. Again, it's a relational ontology. But then you also acknowledge the need of change, because that's how Marsha Linehan developed this therapy. I want to eventually play videos where she talks about it, but because she's awesome. She's so good. Like, I'm obsessed with her lately. She's a beautiful, beautiful person. She even talks about because she had this. I think she was diagnosed with borderline or one of the first people or something. And then she evolved this therapy to help other people, very much like AA. And she basically said, these people are in hell. And if they're in hell, I'm going to go there and get them out in as much as I can, which is like the idea of the bodhisattva. It's also Christ harrowing hell. It's also St. Paul that my boy Jason talks about all the time, is like, I wish that I were accursed for the sake of my brethren. That's the second death that Jason talks about. Yes! For once, I'm following your Mosaic Vision thing on first pass. Praise the Lord. All right, so I want to play this Tim Keller video. It's not as good. I don't think it. I love it, and I'm gonna play it because I talked about it. But it's not as good as the other one, as the Michelle or Marsha. I don't know why I keep calling her Michelle. Explain that to me. The Marsha Linehan video. Okay, let's play this. Shh. Stop it. My computer is.
How do we talk to people who differ with us about biblical and theological convictions without, in a way that's faithful, at the same time it's winsome and Christian? Is there a way to do that? What are your thoughts?
I think there's definitely a way to do it. It's been my experience that it works best in the context of relationship. And so I've never had an experience of just kind of lobbing grenades.
What? It works best in the context of relationship? It's the only way it works. It's the only way it works. Anything that doesn't come from faith is sin. Trust. If you don't trust someone, you can't hear them. You can't. Not in the way that we're talking about. Okay, onward.
That kind of thing working, characterizing a theological position. But really, I found that if you're in a relationship with a guy and have shown genuine concern for him and life and ministry, then those conversations tend to go much better. I think when you categorize someone too quickly and you don't have that relationship and you haven't got to the bottom of their motivation, because what you find in I know what I found in ministry quite often is guys who genuinely love the Lord and genuinely want to see people know and worship Jesus, that have not, for one reason or another, either had the mentors that other guys have had, or hadn't had someone love them enough to press them and go, well, what do you do with this text, or what do you do with this idea? Or you've got great horizontal theology, but you have poor vertical theology, and there's something about knowing the nature and character of God that really fleshes out things on the ground. And so
that's the kind of stuff with Chandler that just drives me nuts. because yes, but see what he's doing? He's trying to go into abstractions again. But like, this is where I push. This is what I mean, the radical implications of personalist knowing, even as it relates to Christian theology. You can't abstract that. This is the radical implications of the incarnation. Is how do you know God? In the face of Jesus Christ. How do you know Jesus Christ? In the face of your enemy. This is this is dialectical behavior. And sometimes the enemy are people in your house. Sometimes it's your neighbor. Sometimes it's your wife. Sometimes it's your children. Sometimes it's people. Love and hate are closely related. You can't hate someone that you don't love to some degree. The love is underneath that hate. Otherwise, it'd be complete apathy. It'd be complete indifference. Indifference is the opposite of love, not hate. And root it, I don't know. It's just don't root your Christianity in abstraction, please. Okay, onward.
There are several guys I walk with now that we would be in different universes in philosophies of ministry. And we're maybe in the solar system in certain theologies, but we would definitely have differences there too. But by loving them, knowing them, staying in contact with them, and trying to learn from them myself and what they do well, has really given us a platform to have that dialogue where it doesn't feel like they're being attacked or it's the reformed guys coming to get them again. And so that's been my experience to this point.
Yeah, I think I would just second what Matt's saying about the importance of wherever possible personal relationships, because it's a lot easier to caricature somebody you've never met. And I've had instances where I have maybe gotten someone wrong, not intentionally, but I've gotten that person wrong and have had a great conversation, started a friendship, and realized that was not exactly the position that he or she held. And it's the ninth commandment. We've got to represent even our theological opponents in a way that they would recognize. I tell my students in class, if you write a paper where you are critical of a particular person, even if it's a well-known philosopher or writer, you have to state the position in terms that person would recognize before you earn the right to critique it.
That's one of the rules, I think. And you're saying sometimes you actually don't do that well when you don't know the person.
It helps. Yeah, it helps. And then it helps also to critique. You can't have a personal relationship with everybody you critique, especially in writing. It's hard to dig Schleiermacher up and exhume him for interrogation. But
these are the limitations of the written medium. It's McLuhan stuff. The medium and the message, and Jesus Christ is the one place where the medium and the message are the same thing. Or Christ in me. I would say it's the same thing when you're fully integrated. But that's the limitations of the definitional understanding, the literal understanding of the written word, and the further up, further in medium of long form conversations and podcasts and YouTube, which is different. It has its own, anyhow. I think you can do it. Somewhat you can metaphorically interact with someone through the medium of the written word if it's done really well on both sides of that relation through that technology. I've had it happen. I think people have had it happen, but it has a lot of limitations.
Wherever possible, that actually changes then in the way you do things, I think, in the cases where you can't develop a personal relationship with people. It just changes you.
So you don't like Schleiermacher? I've completely misread
one of my
you.
Favorite.
Completely misread you.
See, relationship right here. Here we go.
I'm really glad I had this conversation with you. Yeah, I think one of the rules definitely is to say give the other person's argument position in a way they not only recognize, but in some cases might even say that's as good as I could have done it.
Right.
And then when you start to criticize it, they feel like you've paid me the respect of really listening to me.
Yeah.
There's no doubt if a person if I feel like someone starts criticizing me before they've really listened to me, then I actually tend to write off the criticism, and maybe I should, because it's not really me; it's who they think I am.
Yeah.
I think it might be. Here's another. What do you think of this as a rule of engagement? I heard that Archibald Alexander, who used to teach polemical theology at the old Princeton.
Not a great title.
I know. I think it probably meant
No, it's not.
apologetics, but I think it's a little broader, and it's not a bad idea. You're a seminary professor. Try to get that in the curriculum. Polemical theology. He said, do not assign a position to an opponent that he will not own, even though you think it's the necessary consequence.
Right. Now, see, that's something that I think even in
hard.
in our circles we have trouble with.
Yeah.
And you see it not just in Reformed circles, but you see it in other circles where.
All right, that's all I want to do with that. Whatever. You can look it up. Tim Keller, Michael Horton, Matt Chandler, if you want to watch more of it. Because Keller also said the main thing, like when you're stating someone's position, not like do the benefit of listening to them. Like actually listen and actually ask questions. This is one of my little pet peeves, even in sometimes TLC things, is when you are having a live stream or a conversation, like it's such a subtle thing, like how much you're speaking, how much space are you making for the other person? Are you asking questions where you really want to know the answer and you're really curious, or it's just like rhetorical, or it's just a means to like follow your own egoic intellect and understanding of wherever you want to get? Steel man, baby. Also, this is a great comment by Rod. Rod has a few good comments in here because he understands this stuff. Like, I think this one, people like BPD, people being the canary in the coal mines, I think that's great. I very agree. And this is very true. I think their coping capacities are simply inadequate for the demands of modern life. While the rest of us slowly go crazy, they just break. Agreed. And this is what I said to you. It's kind of like, it's related to psychedelics, because this is a Sturgill Simpson line of metamodern sounds in country music when he's talking about DMT. And he's saying, some say you might go crazy, but then again, it might make you go sane. Like, who are the crazy people out there? Are the crazy people on the street crazy, or the people who are just going through the hamster wheel thing of going in office jobs like the Matrix, who are somewhat like, think about Free Guy, Ryan Reynolds, that are just the NPC people just doing the things of life and consuming. Who's crazy? Who are the crazy ones? I don't know. It's a deep question. All right, but I want to play a couple. Michelle, they're short. What up, Nico? Nick, I want to play a couple of these because these are fantastic. And then I'll open it up because I do want to play with folks a little bit before I have to go. Taya, what up, my boy? Okay, let's do this. Are we working? My internet is slow. I don't know why.
I've been transformed by the very therapy that I developed. Because once I realized that I had to teach the clients acceptance, I realized at that very same moment in my own personal life, I had somehow lost my ability to accept, and that I was going to have to learn it myself. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical point or time off from my job. What I found out when I went to the first Buddhist monastery was within days, I knew that I had found exactly what my clients needed. I had no doubts about it. I figured that out right away. That acceptance was exactly what they needed, but that they had a way of teaching it that I could translate. My problem was I tried to take it stock and barrel to my clients. At Shasta Abbey, the basic message was all the time to try to radically accept everything and to let go of desires and what you want. So we got jobs every single morning. And so it's the idea of practicing letting go of wanting a particular job. If you were sweeping, they would tell you when the bell rang for work to stop, they would tell you, stop in the middle, because finishing is just your own thing. You're trying to do something you want to do, just let go. So it was this whole practice of just constantly, moment by moment, letting go
Not my
of
will, but your
what you
will.
want and radically accepting what is. It was the first environment I'd ever been in. It was completely non-sexist. I thought I'd die and gone to heaven. I'm not kidding. It was so unbelievable. Men and women would get the same jobs. There was no real distinction. I mean, admittedly, it may not have been helpful if I hadn't just completely thrown myself into it. But since I decided ahead of time that I had to learn this, my only option was just to do everything I was told, just throw myself in. And I was a student, so there were 8 of us. We did everything together. It was really the practice of letting go of having to have what you wanted
Ooh.
at any moment.
Ooh.
And the recognition that you didn't have to always have whatever it was you wanted. That had a big effect in some ways on the therapy, that in the sense that I try to teach clients suppressing what you want is.
Maybe your side doesn't have to win. Maybe the right side of history, as you conceive of it, doesn't have to happen, and the world will keep going on. Maybe in your conflict with your brother or friend or spouse, they don't have to see things your way. And maybe things will be okay. Maybe you can radically accept it.
It's not the way to go. You have to radically accept that you want something you don't have, and it's not a catastrophe. And so I stayed there for 2 months. Then I went to Germany to the Catholic priest. It was actually the first time in my life I ever talked to someone who actually understood me, the spiritual part of me. Given that my spiritual part of myself is the core of myself, more central than anything else about me, having that understood was an amazing experience. It had a transformative effect on me. What it did is it gave me a home. I am now convinced that it was the practice of radical acceptance every moment that will transform you. I don't have the slightest doubt. It would transform everyone. But it has to be a regular practice. And radical acceptance doesn't mean you don't try to change things, because you only have to radically accept the moment that you're in and the past. But you can try to change the next moment. You can't change anything if you don't accept it, because if you don't accept it, you'll try to change something else that you think is reality.
Yes.
So radical acceptance is simply the radical acceptance that reality is what it is. And if you want to change it, then you work on changing it, which is perfectly legitimate also. But I think it's hard to change something.
Okay. Nico, I'm not trying to single you out, but this is exactly what I'm talking about with the Keller video. Her video, what is it? It's a 3. I'm guessing, maybe I'm wrong. Is this your first exposure to Marsha Linehan? It's a 3-minute, 30-second video. I'm going to play another one. I would almost bet my life that what you're reacting to isn't what she's saying. This is the Keller video. Before you can disagree with someone, you have to understand what they're saying. Give the benefit of listening first before you disagree. Please.
If you don't accept it. You can't change anything if you don't accept it, because if you don't accept it, you'll try to change something else that you think is reality. So radical acceptance is simply the radical acceptance that reality is what it is. And if you want to change it, then you work on changing it, which is perfectly legitimate also. But I think it's hard to change something if you don't accept it in the first place.
It's hard to change something if you don't accept it in the first place. You just now, okay, nope, go back, because we want one other one to play. Oh, come on. Sorry, guys, I didn't have this queued up right. I should have had it. Which one was it? There's another one I played. Okay, this one is fantastic because I posted that in my community thing, but there was another short one. Here we go. How she learned it. Okay. Core components. What's the other one I played? This is where I think this is where Grimm has like his things when he doesn't have his stuff together. Here we go. Emotion regulation strategies. That's the other one I've listened to on these, but these are all short and they're super good. I'm going to play one more and then I'll open it up and people can come in and we can fight a culture war about how I'm wrong.
Borderline personality disorder is primarily a pervasive disorder of emotions. It is the inability to regulate emotions. And by emotions, I'm talking about a very broad spectrum, not only how you feel, but the physiology of emotions, the experience of emotions, and the actions associated with emotions. It's a group of people with extraordinarily intense emotional suffering who are also simultaneously unable to change their suffering and regulate the behavior that comes from that suffering. So the problem there is, how do you teach emotion regulation? So I developed an entire module of strategies for regulating emotions. And those strategies have been taken from the science of emotions and from the evidence-based treatments that treat emotions. You know, if we had a person who had a treatment for one emotion, I simply looked at what do those therapists tell that patient to do, and then I repackaged all that as a skill. I would have to say about half of my patients, if you ask them how they feel, what their emotion is, they're functioning like they're looking in a fog. They look down and they think, I have no idea. They have no idea what their emotion is. So the first thing we have to do is teach them how to do that. And we have strategies which are very effective for that. And then we have to teach them how to regulate. So there are many strategies for regulation. You can look at the vulnerability factors. So often you're very emotional today because of something that happened yesterday, because you didn't sleep, because you didn't eat, because of some stress from yesterday. So one of the things we look at is, what are the factors that make you vulnerable to being emotional, and how can you change those factors? So we look at that. We look at, what is the prompting event, meaning what happened right before? Is that something that you can change? If you can, that would be teaching problem solving. If you can't change it, we go to the next, which is, what's your interpretation or what's your thoughts about that? We have a skill called check the facts. How do you check the facts to see if your interpretations are correct? So on and on. I mean, there are a lot of different sub-skills in emotion regulation. We know that emotion regulation skills are effective. We've got data on just that all by itself. They are effective in teaching people how to regulate emotions.
All right, that wasn't the one. I thought I was going to play the one where she gives specific examples and she talks about really well. There's another short clip, but you can search it out if you want it, I guess, about where she talks about, and maybe she did and I missed it because I was looking at comments, about what she means by radical acceptance and simultaneously accepting change. Because that's the thing. When people are balking at radical acceptance, they're not acknowledging that that there's a simultaneous need of change, an acknowledgement of change. So it's not just like love is love, you're okay the way that you are, you don't have to do anything, everything about you is perfect. It's just that I accept you as a person, and I accept your experience. Doesn't mean it's not agreement. You know, that's all right. The serenity saying, yeah, it's like, Lord, yeah, exactly. I don't know what the serenity prayer is. Everybody probably knows it though. Okay, I don't have it. Go to Cassidy Vanderkamp's information addict thing. She like closes with the serenity prayer every time. So I'll open this up for a little bit until my fam starts waking up, and then I'm gonna go. And then people can just, if people come in and they want to hang out, they can just hang out on their own until maybe, you know, somebody else shows up. What up, Rob?
Morning, Luke.
Look at this. I am
All right.
blessed. I am blessed with your presence. Is this the first time you've come on my stream?
It may be. It's one of my first live streams ever. I don't
Wow.
usually do this. Well, you're touching on a subject that I know at least a little bit about, so, and have a particular interest in. So I figured, well, this is a good time to try anyway. I got my coffee and still a little froggy.
Well, wonderful. If you have any immediate thoughts, we know Chad's gonna. he has thoughts like I have thoughts. But if you have anything immediate to say, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have the unfortunate, we probably would not, at the time something like a diagnosis would not have been available, but I was very likely raised by an undiagnosed borderline.
Hmm.
I think by today's standards, that would have been the sort of the rubric that would have been used to try to make sense. Experienced a lot of trauma, a terrible car accident that killed the father and one of the sisters, and the entire family was badly injured. And I think she was maybe 12 at the time, something like that. So lost half her family, and it was in rural Maine, so they were all sent to separate hospitals. So they were immediately atomized and separated from each other. I think her mother had broke her back and was in traction for like 6 months, and my mother was told she'd never have children. And this is a story that I knew well because it was repeated many, many times. If you met her, a week before she died at 83, you would hear the story and it would sound like it happened last year. I mean, in some sense, it was a trauma that she lived and relived. And so, needless to say, in adulthood, I would find myself inexplicably attracted to certain kinds of emotional signatures in women.
Yeah.
So this is in some ways a lived a kind of expertise. So yeah, I'm particularly interested in this. And as I said in my comment, I instantly understand why you're making the connection you're making, because if you're in that world, they have something called chosen relationships and unchosen relationships, and they make that distinction. Because if it's a romantic relationship, at least theoretically, you're choosing to be there, right? But if it's a child or a parent or a sibling, a family member, it's a very different thing, and it's a very thorny thing, because in some ways you're sort of trapped in that labyrinth with this person. So everybody in that system is being stretched to their absolute limit, right? And so here's where DBT becomes a real lifesaver for at least some. It's not a cure-all either, but at least it's showing promising results. And basically I was sort of making the point of the comment. The point that I would make, and this is kind of the conclusion I drew after observing this very closely and very carefully and very painfully, and doing a ton of research and deep dives and reading books and just trying to make sense of it, right? Is these are highly sensitive people, and we call it a disorder. We treat them as if there's something wrong with them. Dysfunction, right? Dis doesn't function, work doesn't work, right? Dysfunction, it doesn't work. But you can easily see that they're in a system that's making demands of them that they simply can't live up to. In the more extreme cases, I said they're treated like emotional burn victims.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to find a way to relate to them, particularly if it's an unchosen relationship. So how do you do that? It's a deeply, deeply human, painful thing that defies categories. It defies, propositions. And so the connection you're making to how do you navigate something like a culture war where everyone's inflamed and everyone's waiting for offense is not that different than trying to have a satisfying relationship with someone who has a personality disorder. They're still human. They're not evil. They'll act in ways that will push you to your absolute limit, and maybe sometimes you'll be convinced maybe they are, and maybe some of them are. Maybe some of them have other Machiavellian traits or
Yes.
or, dark triad traits and other. So it's not it's not like they're not capable of evil, but normal people are capable of that too. So it's more like these are people in deeply suffering in real pain, and
Right.
and anything can set them off. And if you're trying to navigate that, learning these skills is at least a way to manage it, right? And so the connection you're making to like, okay, well, how are you going to sort of wade out into the deeper waters of the culture war and try to find ways to have mutually satisfying conversations or mutually satisfying relationships with people who perhaps don't agree with you on everything? All of these skills are applicable, and And I know the word acceptance tends to set some people off, but
Yeah.
acceptance, radical acceptance, is this idea that you can hold that middle. Like,
Yes.
someone can tell you something, the most outrageous thing you could, it's like, it's just completely wrong. They're making things up. They're attributing motives to you. They're reading your mind. They're telling you things you're thinking that you're not thinking, whatever, right? And you can accept that they are telling you what they believe to be true, and you can mirror that back to them. I accept that that's how it looks to you.
Yes.
Without adopting their reality, right? It's a hard thing to do, and it's a practice, but
it's very disarming though. When you do
Yeah.
that with someone, I've had this experience, even though no matter how outlandish and crazy it seems, all of a sudden, like the rage, you just see the rage just like disappear. It's unbelievable. The kind, like it completely disarms that spirit when you accept it. It's it's radical grace kind of. But Chad, I know you got to go.
So a couple things. Hello, good morning.
Hey, bub.
Hey, Chad.
The this radical acceptance, or let's say personalism. A couple things are striking me about something to do with sincerity culture and the idea of the sincerity culture and authentic culture that Paul talks about.
Mm-hmm.
They're a stack. They shouldn't be separated.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that works. So you have to walk the line between sincerity culture and authentic culture together
Yeah.
to make this work. So it's like adopting. Yeah, it's interesting. But so many things. So when I was listening to you on my way in, I was heading eastbound from my home on the interstate, and the sun was beating on the interstate highway, on the road itself, in such a way that the road looked completely white for miles and miles and miles. It was white, and this is really stupid, but I was thinking, it's really weird. So my experience right now is that the road is white, although I know it's black. And I can't, it's weird how my mind will know this, and yet it won't accept that the road is actually white right now because of my experience, my point of view. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the road is black. I don't know what the hell this has to do with anything, but it was kind of blowing my mind and thinking.
It's like the blue dress. What's that dress? The blue.
And the gold,
whatever.
Yeah. But I was thinking of like if somebody who was blind all their life and then somehow could see and they were in my passenger seat, they would have their experience of the road would be that it's actually white. They would have no context to know that the road is black.
Chad, can I riff on that quick?
Yes.
Okay, so this is this is like the definitional rational understanding is like if you are constantly inverting or subverting your immediate experience of the road being white to what it is black, is you're living in abstractions and you're actually not living in your experience. You're actually not an empiricist, you're a scientist. So you're subverting your experience, your actual perceptions of reality, your sense perceptions of reality to a narrative. You're living in a narratival reality. You're living in, and if you constantly want to switch everyone to your narrative, this is where the postmodernists are right. It's like, no, the road is black and you're an idiot. And you're denying their experience of reality. But that's just the way things work. And if you keep zooming out, though, this is why I love that George MacDonald quote. And you say, the fact is no man understands anything, is like, well, is the road black? Well, I don't know. It just depends. Like your experience of that in time and black and all those experiences. What if there's another experience that you could have future that you have no capacity of understanding, where what you now see as black is like what you're trying to tell yourself is the white?
Or ask any landscape painter to tell you how to paint a sky. It's blue, right?
Well,
yes.
Depends.
Yeah, not really.
Right, it really does depend. It was kind of disorienting actually, because I was like I know there's like a cognitive dissonance as I'm driving in, it was so white that it was more white than the white van that was driving next to me. Right? It was like this hyper white, and it was weird because it was like a weird kind of reflection off the road. The road wasn't wet. I don't understand. Anyway, this is kind of weird. The other thing I wanted to say real quick, and I gotta go. I'm doing my Saturday morning get together with my guys, which is such a blessing. There's so much I want to talk about. Yesterday in the Discord, we were talking. A bunch of us were talking and reflecting on our experience with the corner, and Tim Keller came up, and PVK's relationship to Tim Keller came up, and how in the past Paul has talked about being in a really bad spot in his life, and having his Jordan Peterson-like moment with Keller. And he has not disclosed to any of us what this moment in his life, what this personal rupture was. But I was speculating that what God is so good that somehow he found a way to stay in that Paul found a way to stay in his life and to stay long suffering in his life and in love. And this really strange thing called this corner of the internet, this little corner of the internet, emerges and is like an answer to a prayer, and thus becomes an answer to a prayer for many of us. And this is this really weird thing, and I think it would not exist without what you're talking about with this radical acceptance. You could see Paul doing this all the time. He even brought this up in his video yesterday, in his membership only video on Peugeot, where he talked about this ambiguity thing, where there's just the right kind of dissonance you want to bring to if you're working one-on-one with somebody in your parish. He learned this from his teacher, and he keeps doing this with us. He keeps bringing us this dissonance, not to verify what we already think or to agree with what we already think, but to kind of like bring just enough dissonance where it stretches us to see something different. And out of this mode of long suffering that Paul went through, and I'm sorry, Paul, if I'm embarrassing you. I'm not trying to. I just want to express this gratitude that I have that you stayed with your on the ground experience, and you continue to suffer as the servant that you are, and you were patient and brought through to this new experience. I'm just really grateful for it. So that's one thing that and people that have come before us, people that we've never met, guys like Keller, they have everything to do with this moment now. They've helped us. People like, all these different souls that have existed that we may never meet, have helped us come to where we are, so that we might help people that we never met before. And like, there's a type of faith in that, and there's like this I think this reassurance that we could set aside the things we think we know, so that we might be useful to those that desperately need it, that are wrong or right. So that's on my mind. This other really weird thing, I know I'm moving fast, I'm sorry, but I gotta get this out of my head. I never think about evolution. It never comes into my mind. It's not something I really think about ever. And for some reason this morning, I woke up, the first thought that was on my mind was, evolution is absolutely absurd, and there's no way that it's true.
You spend all your time thinking about the Roman Empire, Chad? Is that it?
No, this is so weird. I was thinking about how strange, like, because I don't know why this happened. There's all one bundle of thought that was in my mind as soon as my eyes opened up this morning. And my wife was like, "Are you turning off the alarm clock yet?" And I turned it off, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, "Evolution is not possible. It it, it makes logical sense, but it doesn't make actual sense because like it doesn't make any sense. Like think about the okay, how old are you right, Luke? You're like 41 or something, maybe 42 or something like that. Imagine walking around with a head that was like silly narrow that had a weird shape to it and you're in the midst of or in the process of evolution so that your head can come into shape so that your brain works so that you can actually like and then you actually have to reproduce and then maybe actually it might stick for the next generation and that has like it just doesn't make sense the more that I think about it. And this is like this thing that we do to try to make sense of the world. We fit these into these like nice, pretty narratives that are supposed to make sense. But when you actually lay them against actuality, it's like there's no way that that makes sense unless humans have been around for millions and millions and millions of years. Like so, anyways.
Well, there's I would promote Karen Wong on the Meaning Code, and Sam actually had a great conversation where they talk about a lot of this stuff. They talk about a lot evolution quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Interesting.
really, I think it's the first time Sam was on her channel.
I'm
it's-
just
yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
No, it's just really good. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's just my luck that the one live stream I actually show up for now I've got to defend evolution to Chad.
Well,
You
I would
don't have
defend.
to. I just
So-
think that it doesn't make sense because, like, imagine being. I'm sorry, I'm going to use scientific language that we at one time was scientific language. Imagine, okay, this is going to be offensive. Sorry, but imagine two retards having to like basically mate so that they might be something greater in a million years from now. Like it just doesn't make sense.
So
Anyways.
I think it would. Rod, I want to hear what you're saying, but evolution, the way I'd understand evolution is the same way I'd understand anything. You get radical acceptance, and you have change. You have divine simplicity. You have process theism. Which one is it? Yes.
Exactly.
Before I ever encountered the corner, I used to my sort of shorthand when people would ask me questions. People want to know like, what's your favorite music, and I would say good music. Or people would ask me, "What do you believe in, science or religion?" I would say yes.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to choose, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that I could add much to. Clearly, the evolutionary theory has gaps in it. Clearly, the sort of airtight. The way people treat it as if it explains everything. What I used to like to say is, okay, you've described it, but you haven't explained it, right? So, I'm not sure I'm quite where you are, Chad. None of it makes any sense, but I can see that it's perhaps inadequate. It's as I like to say, and I say this honestly, I say this about a lot of religious practices as well, is that its explanatory power is under assault, and that if there is a meaning crisis, it's that almost everything that used to have explanatory power for the human condition is losing its explanatory power, and we're all struggling because of it.
It's the black and evolution as the black road doesn't work.
There you go.
That's what I would say.
And to your point earlier, Luke, when you said, here's an example where the postmodernists sort of had a point. The whole idea of lived experience, which is easy to mock and dismiss, but there's some truth there, which if someone presents, the key there is a relational frame, your personalist knowing, right? That if someone who you have something at stake with between you, it's a relationship of some kind, it's even if it's just a neighbor, like I like, if there's if their tree is hanging over your house, well, now there's something at stake. You're going to have to work this out, right? If there's something that binds the two of you, and they have an experience of you and the relationship with you, well, then guess what? It's real, right? Like whether it's fair, whether it's justified, whether it's what you meant by what you said, whether it's right. If there's something at stake between you, well, now you're going to have to deal with that. And I think you know, what the internet has done is made it so every beef, it's as if every beef have to be treated with the same seriousness.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course it doesn't.
And I hope I like. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not actually trying to lay out a beef or anything or even an argument. It's just it was a weird revelation. The fact that it felt very much like the revelation that I had when I was reading Mark 5, and I had that moment where I was captured by Christ. It was like this weird thing where it's like I could see it and not explain it, which is perhaps a character defect of mine. But like I think it's more of a gift. Like, oh, I don't even have to defend it, and it doesn't even matter that I know this. It's kind of weird.
Well, Chad, maybe a useful way of thinking about your white road, black road thing is like if you were a painter from that perspective and you were trying to paint that scene as you saw it, you would have to basically paint that road as white, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's whether the road is black or not, like that scene at that moment, if you're trying to capture that and you're trying to paint that, you'd have to paint it white or, you know, whatever colors you put together to make it look white.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like, I don't know. I feel like this is related. I want to try to work it in. I don't know if we have time to go into this, but like, oh, what was it? There was some on X. I don't interact that much on X. What was it? But I gotta go find it now. Sorry. But Jacob.
I love you guys. I have to go.
See you,
I will
bub.
listen later. And thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with all of us. I don't think we understand how great of a gift that we have. I think we kind of notice it, but we don't really. We're not really. We don't have the full immensity of how beautiful it is. So
Chad,
thank you guys.
Chad, I love the way you spend your Saturday mornings. It's an inspiration to all of us.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you guys. Much
See you,
love.
bub.
Bye
Love you
bye.
too. Yeah, no, to that point, Paul at 37 minutes in his members only video now where he's saying like don't take the bait. There's one of those beautiful parts of why he says something like how he's gotten through TLC essentially something that he wanted that he didn't know he wanted. And it was, I don't know, he goes on to, it's this beautiful section where he's talking about it. But so the tweet that I'm talking about, this isn't to start beef with Jacob Federecci, but John Vervaeke, I don't know, like a day ago said, my greatest aspiration to love wisely and to become trustworthy of love. And I don't know, it got some traction in our little corner because it's Vervaeke. And I think that's great, rooting it in love. But of course that triggered Jacob, who again, this is applicable to everything we were talking about, right? How to disagree, how to do it wisely, fully understanding someone, and whether or not because religion falls into culture war all the time too. This is one of my problems with Bethel and the conversation with Sam and Trip is Bethel could be right about everything and be relationally wrong because she talks about all her theology and culture war in the spirit of culture war, I think. But and I'm not trying to do that in this conversation, in like saying that about Bethel. I would love to, you got to include even the people that you think are wrong. So Jacob said, idolatry of love is still idolatry. The highest aim must be ineffable. But again, this is the ineffability. To me, that is the same thing as rooting your truth in the exclusivist religion of the right side of history, which is the road is black. But then you're going to deny your experience. You could deny your current experience of the road as white, or someone else's experience of the road as white, or whatever color the sky is. And this is the Jedediah Pascal quote that I love so much, is because everything is relational, everything is relative, but that doesn't mean that it's arbitrary. And all of this is related to time, because like your experience of the road right now, or like Peugeot talking about the world being flat. Is the world flat or round? Yes. Is the road white or black? Yes. Because this is where abstract reasoning is useful. You could think right now the experience of the road is white, but most of my experience of the road is black. Well, which of those is true? Both. Well, zoom out even further. Could there be an experience somehow that you have no capacity to understand that would somehow subvert your overlaid narratival experience of the road being black? Is that possible?
Well, and from some of our other conversations, Luke, where I might go with this, which is why is it so important to you that you convince me that the road is one or the other? unless there is something at stake between us, why would we argue about that? I'm telling you, I see the road as white where I'm sitting, and you're saying it can't possibly be white. And after that, what we do next, there has to be some reason for us to have this conversation. Like, what's at stake? And it's much more important that we discuss that. What is at stake? Why are we arguing about it? Right?
The thing behind the thing behind
Right.
the thing. Yeah, no, I agree with you, because that I have the exact same thing. Is like, what is your impulse? It's not so much that I'm opposed to talking about it, because talking about it can be great, and maybe for some people it's necessary. This is another conversation we had. There's, for some people, having the conversation may be necessary, but there is something else at stake, and if your number one, if in order for you to have security and feel okay, you demand that I am converted to your narrative and your way of seeing things, well, then again, I think that's the difference between what Paul is saying is emissarianism and what I would call like a definitional understanding of reality or something. Is you're demanding that I use your words and see things in your way in order for this to be okay, but then you're denying. You're a colonialist. You're a relational colonialist.
Hey, can we boost T. Grog's comments here? Because
Yeah.
this is he says, don't get a brain surgeon, dentist, or plumber who thinks like this.
Yeah.
100% agree. 100% agree. And don't get a therapist. God forbid someone you love is diagnosed with a personality disorder. You don't want them to think like that. They're gonna have to be practically a wizard, because it's an entirely different domain.
Yeah, they're different domains. And Grog, like, this is what we're talking about with narrative and the road and someone's experience. And you can't. This is like where even science at the quantum level, the double slit experiment and uncertainty principles and particles being a wave, like this is, I followed a lot of the comment threads with different people. I think, who was it, the main person that was interacting with you? I think it was Oscar on one of the threads, where he was just trying to disabuse you of this binary, but you don't want to hear it, bub.
Well, I Scott Adams has a thing, what is it? Agree and amplify, rather than fighting it. Like, T. Grog's making an important point here.
Yes.
Which is,
yeah,
there are all kinds of domains. You want the pilot flying your plane to, be very rooted in reality. I think we know what we mean when we say the word in that context, right? The person sitting, Chad, looking out the windshield at a road that is white, he is saying, no, really, it looks white. And right now, that road looks white. And you could say that, and it would be true. If he said that road is white, well, now we're going to have a problem, right? It's like, well, it's not necessarily,
is there the same problem saying the road is black?
Well, exactly. That's what I said about painting a sky. It's like, is
Right.
it blue? Well, I mean, it kind of looks blue. It's not actually blue, right?
Right.
So, but being able to straddle that, hold those two realities, is, I think, the point of your whole stream today, right? Is like, both of those things can be true. And why are we fighting about it? Like, what's at stake? Why? In some cases, we get really, really, really heated in these arguments. Okay, that means something's at stake. What is it? Why are we arguing about it to that extent? Because we know we want our plumber to be able to make, plumb a house that won't leak. And we know that there's a trade there. There's a craft that he needs to know how to do that. He can't just kind of conjure it. It has to be real, right? And that's not wrong. And frankly, I think, I hope T. Grog keeps coming around, because we've never met. Is his name Tim?
Yeah, I think so.
Tim. Well, we've never met Tim. But I think there's a leavening effect that, my temperament is I try to, get along with people. So I try not to pick fights that I don't need. But I still appreciate the point he's trying to make, which is that these conversations can float away if they're not grounded in something.
Yes.
Being able to hold that tension, I think, is maybe what we're all trying to figure out.
Absolutely. So I want to highlight a couple comments and then ask you a question, and then I may shut this down unless a bunch of other people want to show up and keep it going. So, so McMosa said this comment: "I'd hop on, but my brain is fried from talking to Tyler last night." And then Mandy said, "Yeah, so is mine," and it was like 10 minutes. That is also my general experience of talking to Tyler. I love that guy, but he's so much better at the emissary technical left-brained side of things. Like I'm much more like Chad, where I can see things and I can't explain them to you. Tyler can do both. He can see things and he can explain them to
I
you.
love, because I came on prepared to like go as deep as you wanted to go about
Yeah.
dialectical behavioral therapy or just what it's like to be in relation. And Chad gets like, I don't even really know what I'm talking about here, but the road is white, and I love that. Like we just immediately that just took this conversation where it's taken it, and frankly, way more effective, way more useful. It's a nice little heuristic for what it was that we were trying to wrestle with.
Right. And I mean, all sorts of things are connected. When I talk about anything, I'm talking about everything. But then I want to ask, so T-Grog says this, and this came up, you are not a quantum physics expert. And this came up in the Sam, Tripp, and Bethel conversation toward the end.
Is anybody on here claiming to be a quantum physics expert?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I think we just brought it up as an illustration. And so he's
Oh.
like, you're not an expert with it. But this gets into a little bit, if you want to go into logical fallacies, expert witness fallacy, and always appealing to experts as an authority. But then it gets into the question, which is one I'm very interested in, is for you, I would ask, what is an expert to you, like, as far as you understand it, and what is the value of an expert? Because that gets into like meaning and value too.
Well, I guess expertise would imply a kind of specialization, right? And there's a trade-off there. The more specialized you become.
That's a very succinct and accurate way to say it. I think that's true. Yes.
So, you can become deeply expert in one or maybe a few things if you have a long life. But being able to recognize patterns, being able to zoom out, see the connections between things, to be able to have some sort of larger worldview that's nested within, so that you don't, you've got your hierarchies right. I mean, all that stuff. Anybody who's met any experts, quickly realize it's kind of my thing about, befriend a politician. Like once you know one politician well enough to know them, you won't pin your hopes for some utopian future on politicians. Same goes for experts, right? And
Scientists, pastors.
Honestly,
your expert.
That's what the internet and the social media is doing, right? We're all naked and we're all realizing it, and it's scaring the hell out of all of us. It's leading to a real existential meaning crisis, because we don't really know who we can trust.
It's not scaring the hell out of all of us.
Well, you know what I mean. I'm not saying actually we're all scared.
Yeah.
Some of us are, and some of us more scared than others.
Yeah.
I'm speaking. I'm exaggerating.
But yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. Experts imply and smuggle specialization. And is specialization, again, good or bad? Yes. Like it's good for some things.
Well, if I'm going to
planes and dentistry,
if I'm going to trust you, I need to know how you get paid. I need to know what's motivating you. Are you motivated by status?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to sell a book? Who could make it so you can't pay your mortgage next month? Right? Like I need to know these things in order to fully trust you, right? And that's very hard to do if it's not in an immediate, within your sort of, your Dunbar number of people that you know well enough to know what they're really made of.
Isn't that the whole? Because that's, I mean, to flag this video and put a little thing under it, but isn't that the whole COVID thing? And that's like what Rogan always talks about, his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Like, in order to trust him, like, where's the money coming from? What are you beholden to? Are you a Machiavellian psychopath? What's?
I think COVID broke so many of us in terms of like our, maybe we had just vague notions, and then COVID comes along. I remember. I mean, Facebook. Remember Facebook?
Yeah.
I'm suddenly I'm from California, so a lot of my legacy Facebook friends are in California, right? I'm not anymore, but I was still seeing a lot from California, and before COVID, I was going back and forth quite a bit more. And I'm watching people I thought I knew just go crazy, like just in and not seem to have enough self-awareness that they sounded crazy. I mean, you realize you're posting this on the internet, right? Like, and they just seem to have lost their minds. And perfectly nice people, that I knew at least enough to be Facebook friends with. And so I think, yeah, for a lot of people, that really did change what our ideas are about expertise, and what our relationship to them and it should be. And I think we're all still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right. Well, I just know this is unbelievable to me. I'm not being interrupted yet, and so I should probably just shut this down, Rod.
Be a dad. No worries. Nice to get on with you. We didn't really do that much with the whole subject of DBT, but
well, we'll talk. We can talk offline about this. But
But anybody interested in the subject, it's a worthwhile, rabbit trail to follow.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting, particularly if you have people in your life who struggle with this. I think it's very useful. And I put it in the comments too, but if you go back and find in the early Genesis lectures, somebody in the Q&A asked Jordan Peterson to opine on the subject of borderline personality disorder. And he says, you know what, it's 9 o'clock. I don't think I can do it tonight. He literally just tapped out on the question. And then a few lectures later, somebody came back to that and said, last time you didn't really, do you want to try again? And he did. And it's the reason I mentioned it is because it's one of the few times you'll see a person with deep expertise as a clinical psychologist who's sat with people in their suffering for thousands of hours, right? You'll see him really struggle with how to talk about something as vexing as this subject. And in a sense, because of that, it gives it extra depth, I think.
Yeah, because it's very much so. Tayo, I mean, I don't know if you have time, but Tayo said he can keep it going if needed. Well, if Rod has time, you can come on and keep rolling. But
I would do it just to overlap for a minute with Tayo. That would be a privilege. I don't have much more time, but if others will join, that would be great. I got to kind of get on with my morning, but I'd love to overlap with Tayo enough to say hello anyway.
So Tayo, if you want to, but also, to me, to your point of that question of DBT being asked of Jordan Peterson and him just not really knowing, to me, that's like a, this doesn't make sense. Those things for me have always been like, there's gold here. Like this does not fit any of my maps and I don't know how to deal with this. And I'm just like, go into it as my priest wife loves, he communicated to her somehow, as my wife likes to say, like, I'll support you in whatever way you want to torture yourself, because that's just like, that's one of my recurrent things is and this isn't like there's probably some weird puritanical hyper pietism in me that also goes into that. But I think there's difficult things are usually very meaningful. I don't know. It's probably the Jordan Peterson, like carry a rock up the hill. Like, What did Tayo say? Well, what did he say that was well said? What up, Tayo? Welcome, buddy.
Yeah, what did I say?
Midnight.
I don't know.
I like it.
Mandy said, well said. I don't see you comment where you said anything well. Oh, broken is broken? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. That's fair.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's an honor to be on with you, Tayo. I don't think we've ever been on at the same time, but as I've mentioned before, I've been here for the entire journey, all the way back to 2017, and so I've seen you many times on screen, and I've always appreciated the spirit that you bring to even contentious conversations.
Tayo is one of I would say he's like one of.
Hey, don't step on my compliment.
I'm trying to affirm it. He's like one of the exemplars of what I mean by personalist knowing, because like he just does it. He embodies it.
I don't think Tayo's that great.
I completely agree with Mo.
And McMo is funny. Like, I've got that. He's funny and insightful.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
Smart, very funny.
I'm more funny than smart for sure. That makes me think of, I did this in like 5th grade or something. We did this project where you put your name on a sheet of paper and then you like pass the paper over and your classmates write one word to kind of describe you.
Ooh.
And me being a little, narcissist in training, I was very excited for this, and I was really loving kind of thinking of all my classmates and writing things, and I was just couldn't wait to see what they had come up with for me.
I would be so the same way.
And
all your special qualities all listed. Yeah.
yeah, I got it back, and it was like funny, artistic, makes me laugh, and I was just like, oh no, none of these people know
Not
me.
handsome, not hot, not rich.
I would have just been sad,
Yeah.
deeply sad. But I love that. That's one of the reasons I relate to you is McMo, like you have your humor, like humor and sadness, but that's all like funny people. Comedians talk about that all the time. That's outside of like theological, philosophical podcasts. That's all I listen to basically. It's comedy podcasts. And they're all just like, we're so sad.
Well, if you gave me the option, I'd rather be happy than funny. But, we don't really, we're given the gifts we're given, I guess.
That's your cross to bear. Bye, Luke.
That's a very silly cross.
No, God bless humor, man. Because if you lose that, yeah, I mean, there are people who honestly they completely lose their sense of humor, and that is a dark, dark place.
Yeah, I have days where I feel like that. But Ron, I'm glad you're here too. I wanted to ask you if are there any updates on the intimacy crisis? I mean, I think that was where I kind of
marriage. I think
got to know you.
Yeah, that's Mark's thing. The intimacy. I think that's his term. The marriage crisis, though, I think is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We still have a little Twitter PM thing going, the four of us, and every once in a while, one of us will drop a video or an article in the link. We keep saying we're going to do another one, but we haven't yet. I think all of our marriages are still intact, so that's good.
Hold on, y'all. I've got to take my wife to work now. I'm going to take off the microphone and the camera, but I'm still here.
Okay.
That's fine. I'm here.
Yeah, this is. It makes me nervous. Thank you, Tyler. Like I'm not exactly a virgin on live streams, but I'm almost a virgin on live streams. So I need all the support.
Are there plans to make more videos regarding the marriage crisis?
I think it's one of those things where we assume we will do it again, but we're all kind of, first of all, Catherine and Eamon are, they had a house full of teenagers. I think they're getting ready to send their oldest off to college, and we all know Paul's schedule. So I'm probably the one who's the most flexible in terms of like, sure, you want to do another one? Just get caught up. So I assume we'll do one at some point. I think we started to say a lot of the same things. I would be the one that would bring like, I don't know, guys, I'm worried. I'm not sure that marriage is going to make it, and then they would, talk me off the ledge. And so I think, probably the most fruitful thing we could do is get more personal, which is way harder to do on the internet. As Paul often says, it's easy to talk about, like celebrities' marriage or something like, but the marriages he actually knows about, his own and his parishioners, like you can't really talk about it, right? And so in some ways, I think that's one of the ways it makes it kind of the dark forest. Like you can't really go in there, like, because no one will really tell you what's going on. And even the people who have great marriages aren't really, they're not really talking about it either. So it's a hard subject to talk at the level of depth that it actually deserves.
Is there as I remember, Chad and a few others, I think Gavin's had a conversation with his wife as one of the live streams that he did.
Those are great.
Speaking of, I miss Gavin. Where is Gavin?
Yeah.
But there's I guess my question is, would it be more helpful to have those conversations if there were more sorts of couples online? Cassidy and Ferdy had a video drop yesterday for those.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet. I was glad to see that they did it, but I don't know what they talked about. But yeah, I think again, what makes marriage so difficult and complicated is the stuff that would be the most useful to talk about, but it's also the hard. It's kind of like, expectant mothers, and the way you talk to expectant mothers about childbirth, particularly if it's their first, it's like, well, how do you talk about it? And what you want to do is you want to encourage them and exhort them and inspire them, right? Because they're about to face something very challenging, but also very rewarding. I mean, marriage is kind of like that too, right? It's like if you kind of want to talk about all the ways that marriage can be a real crucible. And I think it was inspired to think about marriage as a sacrament, frankly, because it's probably the right level. Maybe it's a little too high for some people, but it should be up there somewhere in terms of a kind of ultimate test and a real crucible for most people. And so all the things that make it difficult, you don't want to turn people off of marriage, but talking about it would probably actually be fruitful. It's just very difficult to do because these are people's actual lives, right?
I don't know if I was turned off by marriage. I guess to a certain extent I was, by discovering what Paul said about it and how it's meant to be a fractal representation of God's love for people. And I was like, that seems like a cross too big to bear. That's
Yeah.
I don't have the shoulders for that.
Yeah, it's hard enough already. Like I gave Paul a little bit of a hard time on some of ours. Where it's like, you're really selling it well here. It's like I kind of understand the impulse to romanticize it. I mean, we have multiple generations raised on Disney fantasies about that's the rom-com, right? And well, at least I had a whole lot of people thinking that marriage was great, but it also left them almost completely unprepared for what it actually takes to be in a relationship, right? I had this experience many times when I was dating, where I would encounter women who had a pretty clear idea of what they were looking for in a man, but had almost no idea what they were looking for in a relationship. And so the sort of Disneyfication of the institution probably in the long run didn't serve us all that well, even if it made people a little more motivated to actually take it on. Yeah, thanks, Phlebas.
Phlebas is the expert on marriage.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the institution, by the way, and my own as well. Like, not just in the abstract. I think it's a wonderful thing that everybody should try at least once.
Should everybody try at least once? Because that's one of my sticking points with this little corner. Marriage is touted as a bit of like the cure for all life illness, similar to our community is touted.
So
and I'm like, should everyone get married? Is that?
This is that trap of talking about things as ideals and then thinking about all the particulars that may be exceptions to that ideal. I think for most people, yeah, if you take the arc of a life, how long life is, you're going to want to take it on with someone else. And so,
my wife's gone, so I can talk about it now.
I love it.
She listened in for a second, and she had a really good insight. She said, I wish people tried on the emotional aspect of relationships like they do the sexual aspect. And I was like, well, that's kind of what dating used to be, like especially in when most people thought that sex before marriage was a sin. But then there's also an aspect, we were talking about it, like it is really difficult. We feel both of us feel very grateful and feel like we kind of, we're blessed by God, lucked out. We put it in different terms depending on who we're talking to, but very fortunate to have found each other when we did and how we did. Because I think that a lot of the Disney stuff was never an option for us because we were friends first. And we became friends basically at the bottom of a pit, and like, so our whole relationship in some ways has been trauma bonding. Because life just always gives you more stuff to, grieve, learn from, grow from. But I do think that, like, yeah, that process of going from the idealized, so we idealize our partners when we first meet them, right? Because that's our bodies basically telling us to make babies with them as soon as possible. And we overlook lots of stuff. And then you have the quote unquote honeymoon phase, where you kind of slowly start realizing those pieces that are unfortunate. but like I said, because we were close friends beforehand, we had pretty much already forgiven each other for the worst things about each other. And I don't mean like sin, like or like, you know, arguments or anything like that. I mean like the fundamental brokenness that was obvious to us in each other. You know, me being able to see her kind of fundamental flaws and her seeing mine. That was so yeah, that was where the story began. And so there's so much that has happened in the last 10 years. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8. And so we were pretty young getting together, but it's been like being in a foxhole, because we've just seen marriages to the left and to the right just, you know, get completely decimated, and decimated in a way that, from an outside perspective, it not all of those relationships needed to end, we'll say, and that I think that a lot of them could have suffered together, and they could still be together today. But yeah, it really is like well, this is why I asked you originally, Rod, because I too have a sense that, you know, marriages and relationships are in really rough shape, and that people are really struggling out there. And I think one of the things that I've seen people struggle with is just how hard it can be. And so I think that goes to a little bit of what Paul's talking about. And when you first said Paul, I thought you were talking about the Apostle Paul. He was the original one.
That
to
happens
say,
around
you
here.
know,
I got to remember, I'm talking to Christians.
That's right.
I like aphorisms. Like a really good one is, love is unconditional, relationships are not. So if one of the first things you could do is disabuse people of this idea of unconditional love, like you're supposed to love me unconditionally. Like, well, that isn't at all realistic, right? So now the thing is, if you make the conditions overt, you ruin it, right? These conditions, they're somewhere underneath the surface, and it's better if most of them are just understood, right? Which goes to my next point, which is roles. There's something called a husband. There's something called a wife. And, you know, I'm gonna romanticize about the halcyon days of the past. Sorry. But there was a time when we knew what that meant. We knew what a husband was. We knew what a wife was, right? And if you asked any parent who isn't, you know, say in a faith tradition, if your job as a parent is to raise your child to be a good wife or to be a good husband, how many modern parents would recoil in horror at the prospect, right? But the reality is that if you were a young man in search of a wife, or you were a young woman in search of a husband, you pretty much knew approximately what that meant, and you pretty much knew approximately what you were going to get. And now what we have is you have these two people who are brought together by, you know, the forces that do that, like to your point, McMahon, right? And suddenly now you're in a relationship. You have the next idea as to what you deserve from that person, what they're entitled to, what you're entitled to. And so essentially everybody's a free agent. Everybody's making their own best deal possible. There's no union left to represent you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's very interesting, because I tend to I think maybe it's too strong to say I disagree with you, but I think I would flip the importance of those two things. Like me and my wife, we believe in the unconditional love, probably more so than the roles. And some of that is because of like I said, we kind of started with you know, a lot of conditions, you know, like the conditions were on the table. And in a lot of ways that allowed us to say, okay, we love each other, and that love is a commitment, regardless of the conditions. And then because we grew up in, we were part of a big kind of evangelical megachurch at the time, the idea of biblical gender roles, for this particular church was probably an idol. You know, it was kind of branching on the thing that, like, the type of thing that if your wrist went limp, you know, and an elder caught you, you might get a talking to, like, we need masculine men, you know. So we come from this context where those roles were overemphasized, and the unconditional nature of the type of love that's required for a lifelong relationship.
But you still had them. but you did still have them, even if they were too rigid. You did still have them.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too, is like, me and my wife talked a lot about this, because and it might sound silly to some people, but it actually took a lot of figuring out, because I, at the time, and still to this day, was a very sensitive, and you could call feminine type of guy in some ways. Cry at movies, cry in church, like talking about my feelings, that kind of thing. And my wife was a very masculine.
I don't accept the premise that that's feminine, but go on.
Right. Well, yeah, and me neither. But at the time, that was kind of that was the context. And my wife is brash and even less polite and more disagreeable than me, if you could believe that. So she's no wallflower, and so this seemed kind of like the opposite of what our church kind of would have wanted. There were some questions on whether or not I would be able to lead her. And so we of course thought that kind of no roles, total equal 50-50 was something to kind of strive towards. But it wasn't long until we found out that it's not 50-50, and it's not even necessarily roles as much as there's things I'm better at. And some of the reasons I'm better at them is because of my genetics, and my gender, we'll say. And then there's some things that she's better at, and a lot of those are because of who she is. And so it's not like we didn't try to take the roles and turn them into molds, and have to confine completely to this idea abstracted from what a husband is and what a wife is. It was more so this kind of process of us both trying our best to give 100% and seeing where her 100% was more useful and my 100% was more useful. Like it and some of that also got complicated later on when she got sick. And so, yeah, then it was like, no, there are no gender roles. McMo is cooking, cleaning, taking care of the pets and going out to the 9 to 5. And the woman's role is to rest in bed. And so, yeah, I hear you on that, but I wondered, what do you think about, well, first, it makes me sad that you don't believe in unconditional love. But what are your thoughts on that, and like specifically the gender roles or whatever?
Remember what I said. Love is unconditional. Relationships are not. Right? It's a
I took the bait
distinction.
and I totally misunderstood you.
I mean, of course, now we're going to define love. But depending on how you're using that word, the feeling, that whatever that is, that thing, right? Some have said, in the face of your lover, you see the face of God. Like however you're thinking about and talking about that word, I'm assuming that moves on the waters in its own way, and it defies condition. But as soon as you're in relationship with somebody and you're splitting the rent with them, you're sharing a sink with them, right? Well, now there's all kinds of conditions, and all you got to do is just start violating a few of them, and you will quickly discover that there are conditions. And as I said earlier, on the other hand, if you try to make the conditions overt, well, let's just get these things, on paper. That's called a prenup, right? Go ahead, like try to just make your relationship work by putting all the propositions down. No more than 40 pounds, right? Like, we agree, right? How many times a week we agree, right? Like, just try to bind your partner to any set of rules that they agree to ahead of time, and you will quickly find out how making conditions overt doesn't work either, right? So you're in this liminal space between, there are definitely conditions, but now you're having to try to navigate those. And the point I was trying to make is that without some kind of social norms or roles or something, then you're literally making it up as you go along. And even your story, it sounds like you were in a position where you had such rigid roles that you could then rebel against those roles and define something that worked better for the two of you, which is which is fantastic, obviously, right? That's what you want. Yeah. And PVK will make the point a lot that, every marriage is like a foreign country, right? It's like, each one is its own thing. So, but being able to have some kind of basic protocol that at least gets you started down that path, I think we have largely lost that. That's in some ways, that is, I would argue that the tectonic plates that are shifting under our feet are really the misalignment of interest between men and women, the short-term and long-term interests. And
Yep.
if everybody plays the game to what they perceive to be in their best interest, you end up with these two things just gradually drifting apart, because your interests in the next month or year are not the same as what they will be in a decade or more. And people are playing asymmetrical games with each other and essentially using each other. And as I said, I think on one of our marriage crisis conversations, we've essentially normalized heartbreak as if like, well, that's just part of growing up. It's like, well, think again, right? Like there's some people who just simply don't recover. And I don't think we take it nearly seriously enough that almost every civilization has in one way or another found ways to constrain the unfettered exploitation of the sexes. You know, if you just allow them to exploit each other, very, very bad things happen. There's a whole category of people who just simply get spit out of that and never recover from it.
Yeah, and there's the category of people who, you know, I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day, maybe yesterday. But there's a category of people now, like, you know, think of the evangelical kind of the people who have left the church, the deconstructed types. I know from experience and from knowing a lot of them, not all of the ones, knowing a lot of the ones that exist, but a lot of the people I know are like this. There is this felt sense, I guess, that they missed out on the type of sexual and romantic adventures that they saw in media. And so there's this weird thing where they're like, you know, it's these childless women in their 30s and these jobless men in their 30s kind of LARPing as college kids again, and making like mistakes that, you know, secular, the people who actually made had those adventures, we'll say, learned how crummy and how, you know, shitty it feels to use and to be used. And it's just a weird thing. But yeah, forgive me for misunderstanding you earlier too.
No, it's fine. Guilty here, because I was married very young, a 10-year marriage that I left in my early 30s, and I did that. You know, I spent my 30s and a lot of my 40s being, you know, an eligible bachelor, I suppose, and learned a lot of things. Not proud of all of them, but yeah, it's hard to have an opinion. Man, I didn't want Tayo to leave because he was trying to get us to talk.
I'm still here.
I wanted to, because you raised a valuable question about should it be the ideal, and I might have dismissed it, you know, by saying, well, you know, particulars and ideals. But was there more behind that question?
Yes, but I think the line you guys are going down will circle back onto what it is I was trying to say. But I'm just making sure no one's trying to troll. There's someone backstage without a camera on, so that's what I'm dealing with at the moment.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that brings up things for me. The idea of should it be the ideal? Well, because I think that kind of another one of those things that's a little bit below the surface here. And you said it quoting PVK, every relationship is a foreign country. Well, and that's because every single individual is unique, you know, and so when we're talking about one unique individual finding another unique individual, it's very difficult to have like a textbook or a manual, you know. This is not a 6-cylinder engine where if you tune everything just right,
you'll try this. No, I get what you're saying, but try this. Turn that idea and flip it around on its side, maybe just flip it completely, right? And there is nothing that you have the right to expect from another person. Like literally everything should be negotiated from the bottom up. If you will pretty quickly discover, if you are, you know, engaging the opposite sex with the hope of something like a mutually, well, actually, not even the opposite sex. I think the opposite sex introduces specific complexities that perhaps same-sex relationships don't have, and probably vice versa. But if you're trying to have a mutually rewarding relationship with someone from the opposite sex, you're very quickly going to encounter a whole series of assumptions and covert contracts and surprises and trapdoors and minefields, right? And
Yeah.
if you don't have at least some baseline of mutual understanding as to what is reasonable to expect from each other, you really are starting from scratch, and that
Okay.
is a lot to ask.
Maybe that's what's confusing me, because the way that you described all of those individual expectations, to me, those are hard to distinguish from the interpretation of those gender roles. You know, like those to me seem like a very like of a piece of the type of the type of thing where I expect, like we have friends who just recently the man was unemployed for a good long time. The wife found that at first unattractive, and eventually to some degree unacceptable. And so, but these were culturally urban monoculture people. You know, it was supposed to be, you know, we're a new type of family. The woman's gonna win the bread, the man's gonna be an artist, kind of a thing. And but just kind of biologically or culturally or for whatever reason, that setup was not good. You know, it was unacceptable. And so I think of something like that as like, I don't know. Do you get my question? Like, I guess I'm the way that you were just describing those kind of expectations that you might bring to a relationship. To me, that sounds very similar to bringing in the expectations that gender roles or, you know, relational roles kind of bring. And I understand too that that's like on the one hand, it's nice to have a standard, you know, and if the whole culture agreed that this was a woman and this was a man and this is what a wife does and this is what a husband does, and we're all kind of playing the same game, you know, and like you said, we can get up in the morning and we know kind of what we need to do. But those are also the self-same things that when why do I keep using self-same? I don't know. Those are the same things that basically, to me, that's a very similar thing as bringing in expectations of equality, or, you know, what's the word? Not complementarian, but egalitarianism, you know, like I think that to some extent, and this is why I would want to, you know, center that kind of unconditional love maybe as the ideal, not only in a marriage, but also in a life, because that's kind of what it takes to not only deal with people not meeting your expectations, but deal with you not meeting theirs.
Well, it's definitely the glue that binds you together and motivates you to keep trying. But I guess what I'm saying is I think it's insufficient. You know, is essentially what I'm getting at. I think it's a necessary but insufficient condition. You must love each other, yes, but you also must have relatively mature approaches to how to relate to another human being in a way that's mutually satisfying. And where do you learn to do that if it's not through a formation process? And, you know, partly, McMo, growing up where you did versus where I did, I grew up in Southern California in the 70s. Like, I went to elementary school with kids who were growing up in communes. Like, I would visit, you know, friends who were living in a commune. And, you know, a lot of the hippie culture and the hot tub culture literally sprouted in where I grew up. So I knew these people, right? And so I saw kind of like what Byrne Power talks about, right? Like he's a little older, but he was there as a young adult and seeing the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco and the things that were happening. And so I'm much more familiar with people who've grown up with no religious traditions whatsoever. They would be completely lost in, you know, any of the kind of conversations that we're having. At least, you know, I grew up reading the Bible, so I'm literate. I know the references, I know the stories, and I can keep up. But if you don't have any of those
need to brag.
I'm just trying to have, you know, a little bit of credibility with you Christian folks. So some of what you're hearing from me is, you know, way out there on the left coast, watching people literally try to make it up as they go along and see how lost so many people get. And so it's informed by that. And even as you tell your story, you are definitely nested in a tradition that at least gave you something to reject, right? There was something to at least start with. And there are so many people where they don't have any of that. Basically, they have what, the equivalent of what TikTok would tell them today they deserve from a man or from a woman.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. This is something I've thought about, not just like in other places in life too, which is it's kind of like the idea is like, do you need to know the law? Like, do you need to know the Ten Commandments before you can accept Jesus into your heart, kind of a thing, And obviously, this is totally out of left field, but it seems like a similar thing where it's like,
is this where the altar call comes, McMillan?
Yeah. Rod, repent and believe. But there is a weird sense in which, like, because I was brought up with the Bible and in a religious culture, I kind of know. I don't know. It's hard because and it's a big argument in like Christian evangelical spheres, I guess, or maybe not even an argument, but just different strokes for different folks. But like the idea of like, do you need to give the bad news before you give the good news? And so in this situation, that would be something like, the bad news is there is an ideal husband and an ideal wife, and you're nowhere near it, and you never will be. But here's here's what an ideal husband looks like, and then that'll be bad news because any husband who hears it will know immediately, that he falls short or whatever. But yeah, like that's where that becomes a sticking point is, like you said, like there's plenty of people still getting married, quote unquote. There's still plenty of people pair bonding, mating, and it's like how, and they're just hurting one another at the end of the day. Like that's all that's happening, in the grand scheme of things. Go ahead.
No, I was just anding. That is what's going on.
And using each other.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Ty, are you pair bonded?
No, no, I am not. I'm in the streets, as the kids say.
Somebody said you were
Is
married.
Is that what they say? That's interesting.
Mark, I wanted to bring you in. I think you're unmuted for a second.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
Well, thanks. How are you doing?
Good. Just, listen to the bros talk about marriage,
Hell yeah,
yeah,
brother.
it's a great topic. I just was, I was thinking about, like, I don't know what it was, but maybe 2 weeks ago, there was kind of this meme that was going around, and I saw it on Twitter and I saw it on YouTube, where it's like, your wife is not your best friend, like this thing, like, people say their spouse is their best friend. It's not supposed to be your best friend. It's a relationship, and and it's like from some like orthodox guy, saying that this is, there's a hierarchy and you're blah blah blah. And so I started like I'll just hear things and not really consciously process them and just be like, oh, I think my wife's my best friend. That's messed up, Shouldn't be that way, you know. Like what there's something wrong. And I started thinking maybe I should start trying to make the relationship different than a friendship. And then it just occurred to me like, why the hell do I just pick up these ideas from people, Like it's like I'm glad she's my best friend.
Seriously. I mean,
like she's a really good friend.
Yeah.
Like I don't like
Imagine
these things just like gain steam. And like I get there's some truth to that, like I don't treat my wife like a guy, but it's like, yeah, she's my best friend, and I'm glad. So
I'm guessing, like, I don't know what generation you are, Mark. First of all,
41.
Yeah, praise God, right? Like, good
Yeah.
for you that your wife is your best friend, right? That's awesome, right? And the antidote to all this stuff is like you're actually doing it and it's working, right? And of course, you probably notice the same thing that anybody hearing it would notice. Well, there's a grain of truth in there, right? Because a lot of guys who maybe are a generation younger, when they think of their best friend, they have a whole bunch of assumptions about what that means, and on the second or third date, they're crying about, their mean boss and, getting emotional and leaking all over the place. And they don't understand why she's suddenly no longer attracted to them. And right. So it's like the negotiation of what we mean by your best friend with a role already in mind, right? She's a woman, you're a man, you already recognize the differences versus someone where you might as well be talking about someone from another. Remember that book, Mars and Venus? Remember that from the 90s, right?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It was like a huge book in the 90s. I mean, if you went back and read it now, it would just be ridiculously overly simplified, right? But they were onto something, right? Anyway, I do think that those, all of the history of culture and social norms and customs and rituals were all, a response to this dilemma, right? It turns out that, finding ways to kind of ritualize the way men and women find each other, where they can at least know something about what to expect from each other, really facilitates the process.
Yeah, that sounds. The only time I've heard of the your wife shouldn't be your friend thing was in the Easier to Speak About of celebrity marriages. The Smiths, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. I think
LOL.
before
the model marriage for us all.
exactly. So doesn't sound like great advice. I also wanted to bring in Sherry's question, but Emily was secondly what I think McMull was noticing as well, that the number of deconstructed friends that are now trying open marriages and having this wild affairs. And Sherry's question was how much have Christian stereotypes destroyed Christian marriages?
Yeah, I think this is what McMull was referring to, right? Like, the idea that someone would stand at a pulpit, maybe who isn't married, or maybe who doesn't have much of a marriage himself or herself, lecturing everyone about how to be married. I could see why that would fall flat for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that the autistic answer is literally 0. Marriages have been ruined by Christian stereotypes. Marriages are ruined by the people within them, not abstract ideas. But that's not what she's getting at. Yeah. Because I do think that it's always like the relationship to the stereotype more than the stereotype, right? It's either over believing or being blind to the truth of the stereotype. And so, yeah, I don't know.
What are some of the truths of the stereotype that you could be blind to?
That in general, things like lust and monogamy are not just kind of like prudish concepts used to control people. It's like, it's actually like, to Emily's point as well, like, look at all the people who do polyamory. Watch the life go from their eyes when they describe their partner's partner. It does not take FBI level body language analysis to see what's going on. But then also things like keeping your purity till marriage, like not having sex before you're married, is like low key. Probably it's better kind of utilitarian it's better in a utilitarian way than it is in a spiritual way. Because if you successfully do it, you basically are ratcheting up the tension, and the release is amazing.
And if you were the village elder, if you could get all the young people to agree to those terms, you'd have a much more stable village.
Yes. And there's a whole lot of studies now that show the kinds of chemicals that rush our bodies, especially when we're young, before, during, and after sexual experiences. And so all of that, to me, I'm like, yeah, actually that's pretty good stuff. And it was kind of along the lines of what my wife was saying too, which is a bunch of people are looking for an idea called sexual compatibility, which
I still have yet to hear anybody give me a really good definition of that. It's like it's basically like trying to describe two basketball players that are really good together, or two jazz musicians who just, like.
Well, probably the only person that I've ever heard of that probably had sexual compatibility was like Genghis Khan, you know, because he could just like
We're not asking
conquer.
the ladies about.
I think that would be called forced compatibility.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the
Well,
only true. I don't know.
but the shadow side of that same point is something like lie back and try not to think about where she learned to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. Like but then on the reverse side too, I think there's also, it's a stereotype of like, I don't know. What was the original question? What's the truth of the stereotype? Was that what you asked?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you gave a couple good answers about what can be seen as prudish, the keeping no sex before marriage, dogma is actually a useful stereotype that can be, if you
Yeah,
see
and
that, it can be useful.
another useful one that I would put on the table is mutual submission, which is weird to talk about after we just talked about sex.
Oh no.
But I just mean in terms of outdoing one another in showing love. Like in so many things, if you just took a description of the Christian idea of something and repackaged it as some guru's, maybe you call yourself Porden Jeterson, and you take these scriptural truths and you put them in the psychological lens, and people will be amazed, like the wisdom, and you could come up with rules for life. Yes, Sherry. I feel way uncomfortable saying things that Sherry feels totally comfortable saying. But yeah, like that mutual submission, but yeah, I think that it's just one of those things where the Bible seems to, true biblicism has yet to be tried. Like communism,
Chad,
Yeah.
I was just thinking of like, I'm listening to this this historical book about people who lived in the 1850s and 1840s, and like these luxuries that we have are crazy. The luxury to be able to pick and choose what we want to do because we're so idealistic that it's like I don't know. It's crazy. It's just crazy. I don't have a lot of value.
Well, things like running water and internal plumbing.
Things like there's one of these people in this book he and his wife had 16 children, and 8 of them died, and that was normal. Like that's insane. Like, and to think about like we could like even just we have the power to choose today whether we will or won't have, like we could just like I don't know. It's just crazy. It's we've gotten so far away from we've manifested so much that it's hard to imagine that we should choose I don't know. I'm not making any sense. I can see how I'm making sense, but I'm sure I'm not making any sense. Young God, come on here and show us what you got, buddy.
no, do not come up and show us what you got.
Anyway,
Hands where we can see him, young God.
We have to protect.
I really just wanted to say hello. I saw Mark is on. Mark is my favorite person in the corner, just so you guys know. But that's because I.
Oh yeah, dude.
Mark is real life friends with Chad, so
I'm,
all of us are envious.
I'm good in real life. I'm probably the worst person in the corner, but I don't know.
That's true.
I'm fucking so great in real life. I'm the best. I suck on the internet, but I'm telling you, if you ever meet me in real life, you're gonna be so impressed.
I'll see you at Denny's later, hey?
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
I really like that.
I,
I really like that comment from Emily Tayo, because I think that it actually, like, what are the chances that's going to be good the first time? Well,
I was
what?
going to answer that. That's why I brought it up. For
Yeah.
women, almost 0%. For men, 100%.
Yep.
Yeah,
But
but
even,
dude, here's
well,
the
God,
thing. Like when I was on so-called dating sites, right? Like OkCupid, Go Fish, all these stupid dating sites. Like they weren't dating. Nobody that I ever encountered on there was actually interested in dating. They were only interested in hooking up, and they were also the ones who were instigating this kind of behavior. So I wasn't the only one, right? And so it's weird that it, and I think it has to do with everybody knows it's going to be a damn mess. It's like, but we like to gamble. Maybe this time it'll be different. And so it's not about like our actual experience. It's about this egotistic uh, um, way of thinking that we can over, we can. How do I? Almost like we have this godlike power. Watch me try again. You know, it's kind of weird. I'm not making sense.
yeah.
Well, if
Well,
you
go ahead.
no, go ahead, McCall.
The line I was thinking on was more so that, like, what is 100% successful in those situations is doing exactly what feels right in the moment. And that's kind of and obviously it's never that simple. It's always more complex. The guy's thinking
Yeah.
thing, the woman is thinking things, but like what's actually, they're not successfully accomplishing making love, they are successfully maybe 50% accomplishing sex. But there's a sense in which if that's what it were about, then they would be satisfied, right? But it's not.
Yeah, but exactly. It's because it's not. I can't remember a single one of those times where I was ever at ease. I was always very nervous. I was overthinking. I wasn't really connected with somebody. I was more kind of distracted by the reality of the situation that there's something off here that I can't really explain what it is. And perhaps maybe that's just because I'm a feeble simp, but I don't think that's true. The men who are out there who think that they're going to play this game, like I just I'm trying to think of the lives that they have. Is that a life that I would want? Like, good grief! Like the
Well,
kinds of lies that you have to continually pile up and pile up and pile up to believe the shit that you're swimming in. It's ridiculous. I gotta go.
so
Bye.
Bye,
so
Chad.
Chad has just described a modern day mating ritual, right? That's what most people are left with, and this is kind of the same dilemma I encountered when we were doing our little series. It's like, notice where we have kind of ended up. If you talk about it, if you analyze it objectively, let's say, or try to, you end up seeing a whole lot of structural problems with this institution we call marriage. And I think I used this analogy on one of our conversations about this. I live in a historic neighborhood where a few years ago, what was happening is all these sort of quaint historic houses that were too small for modern day sensibilities were getting knocked down, and these horrific tall, they call them tall skinnies, right? Just if you drive around Nashville, you'll see a number of them. And so this particular neighborhood rallied and implemented what they called a historic overlay, which is basically, in this particular neighborhood, there's a bunch of things you can't do, right? You gotta preserve anything that's considered historic, and roof heights and all that kind of stuff, right? And I started thinking about marriage as kind of an imperfect solution to an unsolvable problem. If you just try to solve this problem, if you're a guy, you have an approach which is just absolutely not going to work with your counterparty, and if she has an approach that's probably not going to work for you. If something like mutual satisfaction is the goal, without some intervening outside force, you're going to really struggle. Not everyone, right? If you're high in agreeableness, you're probably going to have an easier time of it than if you're not, right? And if you're sort of securely attached, it's going to be a lot easier for you than if you're not, and so forth, right? If you have relatively stable mental health and so forth. But the point is, for a whole lot of people to just with nobody backing them up, they basically the only leverage they have is they can leave. That's it. That's the only leverage you have is, if I'm not getting what I want, I'm out, right?
It's not the only leverage. You can also make the other person's life miserable.
Well, good point. No, good point. Yeah, good point. So this idea of an overlay, which is how I started thinking about marriage, is you can almost see how it evolved. We just can't let people just hook up with whoever they want to. We have all the boys in the
We
village
live in a society.
are killing each other over this one girl, and right, and so you can almost see how it would be adaptive culturally, and it makes a lot of sense. The question now is, without some outside force intervening and essentially acting as a forcing function, how do you put it back together? And
well, you can see some of the complications with what's the guy's name, Homath. He takes the approach, and I think it's probably the right approach, that if you kind of look at the quartiles of attractiveness and show how the top 10% of men are going to get the top 50% of women, or have access to the top 50% of women, or something like that. But the top 80% of women are all after that top 10% of men. There's some mathematical discrepancies. And so, yeah, exactly what you're saying. When you look at it on paper, and the paper of a spreadsheet, maybe, rather than the paper of a novel, you start seeing all, like you're saying, these structural problems. But then I do think that there's a sense in which it's kind of like being a vampire, right? Like, in the sense that you can't know what it's like to be a vampire until you've been bitten and you have the thirst for blood. To be in a healthy relationship is really difficult to explain to other people, even though you can. It's really easy to explain it in a way that will get people to give you money. And so this is the charlatan problem, basically, where you've got these relationship experts who will talk about things like attachment. They'll talk about expectation setting and all of this stuff. But for the lonely person out there who really is just, they want to experience love, romantic love, and they want to experience lifelong partnership. They want the commitment, the security, the safety. They want to be, either they want to have the relationship that their parents had, or they want to have the relationship that their parents could have had or should have had. And so it's an inescapable problem, because this is where babies come from. Like, we all come from this thing. But it's also this huge distractor.
To be clear,
right. Well, that's the point, right? Like, it's this. I think I just made a new term, a distractor beam. Like, sex is this big distractor beam in regards to relationship. And I think that most happily married men will tell you there are seasons of celibacy, even in marriage, and so that was one of the lies that was told to people in purity culture was, you save yourself for marriage, and then you get married, and it's all systems go, have as many babies as possible, have as much fun as possible. This is what the Lord has in store for you, if only you can get down the altar. And so that's another aspect of when marriages happen and sex issues start occurring, and sex issues are legion, and it is stuff that's like, it's usually stuff that's not the average stereotype, right? It's somebody's not feeling good about themselves, or somebody's having problems trusting that the other one actually does love them and is attracted to them. These are kind of the very difficult, heart-wrenching, yeah, like thinking about all the times I've cried after sex. My wife rubbing my back. It's okay, buddy. Yeah.
God bless you. Well, yeah.
But like, this is back to what Liv, my wife, said when she was just popped on. Like, this is why I love my wife. She's like twice as smart as me, and doesn't need to ramble for days to be clear. But yeah, the idea of that emotional training, which one would hope they'd get in their family, right? Like, you learn to interact with others first in the family. it's not just that we've got sex totally screwed up and at the top of our kind of desire hierarchy. It's also that we lack the emotional skills. And look at the rise of autism. And I'm speaking specifically in our chat down there. But there's serious issues when it comes to reading emotions, and this is a problem for a lot of men anyway. But just the ability to kind of understand what someone's feeling, the fact that women don't always say what they mean, the fact that men don't always say what they mean. There's all these kind of these intense relationships or these pair bondings become the locust of basically everything that's wrong with all of us. And it's kind of the first line of defense for keeping what's wrong with us from escaping out into the broader community, right? Like that's kind of one of the purposes of marriage is to keep
all kinds of havoc. Yeah.
To keep those things constrained. And so it's a two-pronged problem in the sense that we can't have good marriages because the marriages we have aren't good. And people don't want to get married because they look at all the bad marriages and say, why would I want that?
Well, where I ended up the last time I think we talked about this on that series is I ended up at something like virtue, being marriageable, clean your room, right? Like the best we can hope for is each person individually takes upon themselves. We're like, well, what kind of person am I trying to attract? And I'm going to try to be that kind of person and then go looking for someone who's doing the same thing. That's, in a sense, that's the most redemptive thing I can think of for the moment we find ourselves in, until there is some other cultural forces that sort of get people back together again and liking each other again. And or I'll use the flipped magnet metaphor a lot. Like, there's lots of things causing us to snap together, right, to be attracted to each other. But there's something that happened culturally where the magnet got flipped, and now we're repelling each other. There's so many cases where men and women just don't like each other anymore, and that's just really, really tragic for the culture. I am going to have to jump off, but I wanted to. McMo did a better job. You're actually married, and I'm married too. Mark he's married. Like you've done a good job of actually advocating for marriage on this, and I think that's really important that people should do. I am also married, and happily so. Like I don't say enough nice things about the institution. I probably should do a better job of advocating for it myself. It's more just sort of surveying the landscape and worrying about all the others, right? Is where I'm coming from a lot on these topics.
Give it up, Parlato.
Oh.
Give up your hope, Parlato. You'll never have a healthy marriage. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think it's a great question. Like, what's a good marriage?
Well, if your wife is your best friend, you're doing great, man.
Yep.
Yeah, but some of my friends don't even like me, so I don't know what.
As long as she would describe you the same way, you guys are doing all right.
Well, that's what she told me, but we're doing pretty good, I think. But it's like we've been reading through Genesis, and so we're like with Abraham right now, and so it kind of struck me, like, so did Abraham have a good marriage? Because it seems like they had so many problems, like they were like Sarah was constantly like getting abducted by these people because Abraham was lying about her, and sleeping with his maids. It's like, I don't know. Did they have a good marriage? Probably not by today's standards, like not by Instagram standards, of like, I know people who know people who are like influencers, like Christian relationship experts, and they got some good pictures on Instagram. But I've read some of their texts, and it's not the stuff that's on Instagram. It's pretty bad.
One of the real gems in PVK's archives, go way back, is when he did the whole thing on the sexual ethics of the Old Testament. It's like one of his best. He got pretty salty in that one, and it highlights.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, very few people say they want a marriage like what is it, Hosea and what's her name? But yeah, all it takes to be in a good relationship these days is to be photogenic. Like people will think that you've got it made if you can take a good photo with your partner. So that's
why I have a picture, so you won't have to photogenic.
An
Thanks,
absolute
Rod.
pleasure. I love spending some time with you guys, and nice to overlap with you, Tayo, finally. And I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, see
Thanks,
you around,
Rod.
Have a
Rod.
good one.
Bye bye.
I'm
Tayo,
gonna,
what's the British dating scene like? Or are you gonna leave? You gonna leave us?
well, I was gonna shut it down soon, but that's what's the British dating scene like?
Is it all like that show where the lady goes on dates at the chicken spot? What's her name?
Chicken shop date.
Yeah, chicken shop date.
I don't know. I left the dating scene a long time ago.
Fried chicken in a can of Coke.
Oh God, right. There was something I wanted to get to. I think I started Nico and Phlebas' comment because Phlebas says something. Oh, there it is. You're supposed to have parents that model a marriage.
Yep.
Nico said, "You people need much more than models to succeed." I was like, "Oh, interesting." And I think Rod, in a lot of the marriage conversations that they've had that I've seen, he's talking about creating the arena where marriage can flourish. I think that's what Nico's pointing at. But I think that definitely has to include the having good parents to model a marriage.
Yeah, I think it is one of those situations, it seems like, where I guess this was what I was trying to say earlier, where so often the model of a local healthy church can solve so many of these problems, because you can be in community, quote unquote, you can go to a small group, you can see what a healthy marriage looks like, you can have a mentor, you can meet, godly single women who want to start a family and who are interested in finding men, kind of a thing. But that's a double-edged sword because those same communities end up instilling some of the bad ideas that led to this bullshit in the first place. And so it's kind of like it's back to like the individual thing where it's like you've got to do your best, I guess. I don't know. Like
Do
be
your best. Great pep talk, Mo.
I'm telling you, my brain is fried, dude. That conversation with Tyler last night, I think he did some MK Ultra shit on me. Turn me into an evangelical Baptist again. Who knows?
Yeah, a few times I dropped into Discord and saw that Tyler was old and cool. I was like, I want to, but it's like 12:30 a.m. I'm going to bed. What did you guys get up to? What were you talking about?
Sorry, I was muted.
Hey, I'm gonna hop off. You guys have a good day. Nice talking
Thanks,
to you.
Mark. Thanks for coming on. Sorry, I
Thanks,
was
Mark.
Thank you.
for letting you on.
All
but
good.
get
Take
it.
care.
Cheers.
Mark's a handsome guy, if I remember correctly. I think I think I've seen his face before. But what was I gonna say? Oh, what were we talking about last night? A lot of things, but I think that probably so it started with us watching or listening to the podcast that hey Nick, the podcast that mentioned or that made fun of estuary, which I don't know if you were there for that part.
Yeah, I was there for that.
Afriel was accusing him of hypnotism. That's funny. Yeah. He called me slippery, which I think was a good compliment. So I'll take slippery as a compliment from Tyler for sure. But yeah, we were kind of doing defense against the dark arts, trying to see what these people who had kind of mocked us and scorned us, if they had any good critiques. Not really. They did call Kale Zeldin Zale Vanderploek or something, which was pretty funny. Or yeah, it was Zale Vanderduki. That's what it was.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was pretty funny. But yeah, you were there for that. But yeah, then it got to Afriel and Mills explaining their work on the Defense Against the Dark Arts course that they're building within the Broken Clock Tower Discord. And then, like you said, it just became kind of Tyler holding court because he joins us so seldom, and he is, so smart and wise. And so, yeah, we were kind of all, the way I saw it is like we were throwing our best ideas at him and seeing which ones stuck, So yeah, but it was a really long conversation, a really good conversation, but it wore me out. And now my dog has decided that he's had enough of me streaming.
Hey, Nico.
Yeah, I have enough of McMo too, so I agree with the dog.
That's so funny. Good play.
Well played. You're
So
you're a single lad in a different part of the world to most of us, the rest of us.
yeah,
So, what's it like being single in South America?
um, it depends because really there are two different, well, not communities, cultures here. Let's call it Creole culture and globalist culture, and I'm part of the more globalist culture, and the globalist culture is pretty much the same, except that in my experience, um, it's not so trashy. It's a bit trashy over there. I do expect people around here to be more on the uh, serial monogamist kind of thing instead of the casual hookups kind of thing. I think almost everybody expects to be in a relationship, and that's as far as they go. After that, they don't really know what to do. I think almost nobody is getting married. Um, but I wanted to give a mountain of pushback to whatever McMullen was saying, although I think a
Just
lot of the things he
yeah.
Tear me up, homie. Tear me up.
a lot of the things he said were completely true, but you have to add a few more things in there. And also, I wanted to address what Tayo said. If everybody needed to get married. No, they don't. Just like the St. Paul example. But the thing is that you have to remember that St. Paul was the father to hundreds, if not thousands, of people. He never got married, but he was never alone, in a way. Monks never get married, but they are not alone either. And monasteries, at least for a long time, tended to not go extinct, even though nobody in there had kids. So yes, people don't need to get married, but people who are deracinated individuals either need to get married or need to find somewhere to go.
And let's go somewhere. That's sort of my thing in this conversation. Is there's a lot of conversation, rightfully so. It's the extinction of the species, demographic collapse, blah blah blah. We need children, but if it is true that not everyone needs to get married, how then that shall the rest of us live? What are we supposed to do?
What are you doing?
Well, I have an aunt that never got married, but many times a week she's with her siblings on the weekends. It's okay to be like that if you are part of a community. There is this movie with DiCaprio. I can't remember the name, where he's a hunter that gets attacked by a bear, and then he spends half the movie what's the name? Crawling through the snow. I don't know if anybody has seen that movie. So
Hard.
in this movie, what?
Sorry.
So in this movie, DiCaprio plays a hunter in the Old West, and he's on the Revenant. That's it. I remember.
Oh yeah, Revenant. Yes, yes, yes. I never actually saw.
Yeah.
That's the one who won the Oscar for. I never saw that one.
Yeah, never seen it either.
It's pretty good. So at some point, the character comes up to a buffalo that has a little fire, and it turns out it's from an arrow that a man from a tribe was hunting. And so DiCaprio gets there and begs for meat. I couldn't read it. What did he say?
That was a response to this.
Well, if that happens, then I'm all for that. I think they should, really. And more than there's too many single people out there. There really needs to be something like that. But he finds this Indian man, and he tells the DiCaprio character that his whole tribe has been annihilated completely. He hasn't only lost his own family, wife and kids. It's everybody, and he's the sole survivor. And he says that he's very sad, but he's traveling east or something, trying to find another tribe from the same group. So essentially, this man could manage to lose completely everything and still keep going because he could go. He still had a community to go to in another tribe that he could go. So that's why I always go hard for the community thing, because if you have community, you don't really have to get married. Just like that
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I'm not going to push back on the need for community whatsoever. And you definitely still need a community even if you are married, which I think is maybe the good part of your wife shouldn't be your best friend. It's like I'd probably say your wife shouldn't be your only friend. You know, that's kind of weird if your wife is your only friend. But I don't know. What was it? KL that comment triggered me a little bit because I'm like, where do you go if you're married? What are you talking about? You go home, you go to work, you go to the grocery store, maybe you go to the library, check out some books, read. I don't like that kind of question to me is just self-pity. It's like, poor me, I'm a Protestant mystic. Where do I go? It's like you're where you are. Be there. God placed you here. Love your neighbor. No. Sorry, that triggers me.
No.
Go on, Nick. Push him back again.
What neighbor? It's all strangers. What neighbor?
Why are they strangers?
Because they need a place to gather. That's the point of going to mass. That's the point of going to church. Because you get to know people in a personal level in the same way that Paul does it. That's what he's
Paul
doing.
didn't go to mass.
I mean, PBK not.
Oh.
Yeah, still, PBK did not go to mass.
PBK didn't. The apostle. No, those are shots fired to my Catholic brothers. But yeah, I just mean
people
that like
gather in the center. In the city, there is no center to gather. You can make one friend here, one friend over there, but modernity happens, and then
I'm gonna push back.
You're alone again.
Because the context was single Protestants who probably do have churches that they go to, and they've got mass, a place where they gather. I think what KL was pushing for is there's no telos for singleness, where, like you said, McMurray, you are where you are. It's more telos too that's pushing you towards marriage, and there's no, which is why Sherry suggested they should reform their church and start monasteries. There isn't a practice of, it's a practice of waiting, and it's waiting, like when you're single, you're just waiting to get married. You're in your season of waiting in most Protestant contexts.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree with you that is kind of like of course it would be great to have Protestant monasteries for those single people who also apparently can't stand to just be normal and have a job and, you know, go home and meet with friends and be a community member. Like I
if
don't
you have a
understand, Nick.
community,
Hold on.
if you have a community
I think it'll make a response. I've never met a
and
Protestant
friends and that.
who said he couldn't connect to married couples and families. I've met many Protestant pastors who say they don't understand and don't have a place for singles.
Well, I'm not going to defend Protestant pastors. Those are the same MFers who fired me. But like the whole point of Protestantism is the priesthood of the believer. So it doesn't matter if your pastor can relate to you.
Yes,
Like
sir.
you you read your Bible. This is just for the Protestants, okay? Catholics, everyone else, just don't listen. But for Protestants, you read your Bible every morning, you pray. You pray without ceasing.
Read your
You are
Bible,
you're
pray.
connected to the divine love that set the moon and the stars. Dante could never. You've got it. You've got it all right now.
Bible.
And this
Yeah,
whole, if only I were married, if only there were monasteries, if only I had a
that,
church that I could go to, if only I had community. It's all secondary.
you're
Sorry, that
basically
triggers me.
asking normal people to become saints. Very few people manage to connect directly to God.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
like
not
desert
just
father
normal
stuff.
people. All the people. I'm asking
Theo-
all the people to become saints.
You get
Yeah,
theosis.
yeah.
You get theosis.
No,
It's not
no,
too
no.
difficult. It's what we're called to. My dog
Can you do
agrees.
it? Can you do it? Huh?
By the grace of God, maybe one day, yes. And I by
Uh-huh,
faith will
uh-huh,
do it.
uh-huh.
Will do it.
Uh,
But it's see my dog's agreeing with me.
That was a preach, brother.
No, no, no. You want
See,
to participate in the community and have fun with your friends by being single. Uh, People can do that. I think that's doable if you have a community and friends. And I would put those two together. I'd say uh, I would say friends count as family. Uh,
you would say
but
friends
the
count.
problem nowadays,
Did you say friends count as families?
as family, as part of the family, uh,
Okay.
if they are, real friends and not more like an acquaintance, somebody who you chat every so often, but you could never, let's say, ask for real help, or maybe if you invited them to uh, something important, some festivity in your life, maybe they would find it a bit awkward. Maybe they would tell you that I don't have that kind of relationship. Not those kinds of friends.
Emily, if you want to find out why McMurray got fired, I would suggest a Friday morning nameless McMurray Rando conversation. Or McMurray, if you wanna give a quick summary, you can. But
Yeah, I got fired for being just better than everybody. No, no. Um, yeah, Nico, I think that this is why I think that loving the neighbor is leaves no wiggle room. Because when I think of the neighbor, I think of not only, the people that live next door to me, but I also think of the people that I see in the grocery store. And I think of, at times, I even think of the bugs that are around me when I sit outside. And so obviously loving those different creatures is different. Like obviously I'm not going to give my life for a bug, although don't tempt me. But I think that I think I'm agreeing with your point that marriage is not for everyone. But to use either marriage or the there being no place for single people, which I still don't know what that means. Um, there's a sense in which it's avoiding the issue. It's a skating around of what you're really truly meant to be. And you're not really truly meant to, yes, it's not good for man to be alone, right? Like that's Adam in the garden. It wasn't good for man to be alone. So you're not meant to be alone. But it's not that you're loneliness was what was keeping you from, the good life. It's always going to be
Yeah,
some combination of your selfishness or your blindness or your state of being dead in your trespasses.
there is no life alone. None. No, nothing. When has anybody been alone? Maybe some desert fathers,
So you're saying
some
there's a
hermit.
chance.
People have always been together in groups. They have never been alone.
Well,
It's
I thought
like
you were saying
breathing.
that
It's like eating.
Yeah, that's go on, McMull.
But
if you're
the
never
monks
alone,
are
then
all
there's
together.
always someone there to love. And that doesn't require you being single or married. If you're never alone, there's always someone to love.
Yeah. But the reason people need to get married is because they are alone. And if they don't get married, they are going to be completely alone. As in,
You can get married and still be alone.
So nobody's alone except for the people that should be married and aren't. And desert
no.
fathers.
Remember all of the randos that have gone to Paul, as in PDK. The big problem in modernity is that communities keep breaking up and people find themselves ever more alone. And it keeps going and it keeps going.
Yeah, it's
The
very
problem
painful.
is that people are alone. And it's not just painful, it's deadly.
Well, sometimes the pain can get so great that it becomes deadly, or
No.
you can slip and fall, and no one's there to take you to the hospital. Sure.
No. People are not individuals. They are like members of a body. They are like an arm.
Who said that? You or your community?
No, I say that.
As an
People
individual or as a
are
community? Are you
like
speaking
a
for a group
leg
right now?
or an arm. No, I'm speaking for the whole universe.
Okay.
People are not individuals.
Wait, what? Wait, pause.
Yeah.
First, Aaron, how are you doing, brother? Good to see you.
Pretty good. How are y'all?
Doing well. And then we've got Sherry. She'll speak when she's able to. Hi,
Is
Sherry.
that really Sherry?
That's really me.
came?
It's really me.
Okay.
I'm just, I can't turn my camera on. It's too early in the morning. I don't want to frighten everyone.
Well, share some light, Aaron and Sherry. Me and Nico might be going down a doom spiral here of disagreement forever.
Well, the only reason I hopped on was because I had too much to text. So here's the thing about the Protestant singleness problem that I think is important to realize. Yes, everyone should be a saint. Everybody is a saint, actually. Everyone should let their light shine. But then there's also the need for people to get by in the world. Like, so, when you get married, you have a partner who can help you literally, buy a house, dream for a future, having a family is also investment in that, right? Towards I don't know. I don't want to call it like material prosperity or anything, but in a sense it is. And then some kind of security in old age. That's also really important. So here's the thing. I think that if there is a place for people who are happy to be single, because there are people who are happy to be single, right? Then they can work towards those goals, or they can have some of that. They can work together in some kind of a community. If that makes any sense.
That makes complete sense.
That makes sense to me too. Yeah, I think that maybe where
Nico's shaking his head. Go on, Nico. Why does that not make sense?
Yeah.
All of that is true, But it's not just that when you have a community, a family, and all of that, you have people to talk to and somebody to take care of you in your old age and all of that. I think it's more like being part of a group is like eating food. If you don't eat, you're done. People say that they are happy being alone, but are they truly alone when they say that? Because maybe sometimes some time goes by and then they find themselves that they are completely alone, as in totally, and then they feel differently. I don't think I don't know if it's even possible for a single person to do it, because the desert fathers were in contact with God, so that's not alone.
Are you in contact with God?
Uh,
So is the problem that there's a lot of single people, or is the problem that communities are breaking down?
the
Well, I personally
first
just think I think
leads to
human
the second.
beings human beings are social creatures. Like they need community. And I mean I'm thinking of the Beguine orders in the Middle Ages. They were largely, first of all, they weren't adopted by the Catholic Church as actual orders. They existed outside of the church, so to speak. Although they had spiritual fathers who were willing to be there for them. But they were, generally speaking, women who were left either as singles or widows, and they had nowhere to go in that culture to survive. So they pooled their resources. They charged money for their services. They had a community pot. They served their community in whatever ways they could. A lot of them were midwives and healers, and they made things. And in a sense, even though the culture was Catholic that they came from, they were Protestants because they weren't really within the church. And I think it's a good model, actually, for the conundrum I think that the Protestant church finds itself in.
Yeah.
I'll vote for that.
You vote for that?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I think it's more like the realization that most communities are broken down, and even within the past 50 to 100 years, there was just a lot of small communities instead of one massive community. And I think for maybe millennials and younger, maybe even Gen X to a degree, I think a lot of it is this kind of feeling of behind the other side of the glass with, finding a community and family and love. Like you feel like it's so close, but for whatever reason, you can't reach it. And I think a lot of people have to, maybe in a universal way, always just be in communion with all people, but in a Protestant way, realize that you have to, if there is nothing for you to be a part of, you have to start it. And a lot of that, it could just be, talking to some random person you don't know who's just not like bugging people, but honestly, I think a lot of people just feel like they are inconveniencing someone else by just talking to them. I really like McMo earlier said he's tired of this pity talk, because I mean, I do that. And I think a lot of people just feel like they are a burden to other people, which is a shame, And I think it would be easier to talk to people and be in communion more if it was maybe lower stakes, You know, he's just like, I'm reaching out just as a random person, just being nice, not like I need community and fulfillment. Fix me, you know.
Well, here's a question, Aaron. Yeah. Like, when Chad got on, he was talking about how much luxury we have compared to people in the 1800s or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think I wrote something in the chat like, you know, we live in a culture of entitlement. And what happens to a culture like that is that nobody starts anything. They just wait for someone to give them something or make something happen for them. And that's where the pity party comes in my opinion. So how do you become a self-starter? Like, who decided to start the Begin community, right? Like, somebody had to have the idea and make it happen.
Well, I think it has something to do with like gifting and your gifts and the gifts God gives you as a person. And so this is why I'm always trying to bang the drum of the individual. And I'm not trying to talk about an isolated, abstract thought of an individual, because I know we're all connected, but I'm trying to talk about who you are in front of God Almighty, you know, and he's blessed you with gifts. And the thing is like, okay, I'm routinely sad. Oftentimes I wake up and I spend the first 30 minutes of my day trying to cheer myself up and to not focus on everything that's making me sad. Yeah. That was true of me when I was single. That is true of me now that I'm married. You know, my wife did not fix my depression. But also she didn't take away from me my, you know, charming good looks and sense of humor. So like those gifts are still there. I'm making light of it. I obviously I have more important gifts, hopefully, thank God. But there's I think that's the key is the gifting and kind of the obedience and responsibility of using your gifts to serve others. And that you don't need permission to do that. You don't even really need a group of like-minded people to do that. And so that's kind of where I'm, I guess, trying to lean is just to encourage people that, you know, whatever you think you need to be a happy, healthy, fulfilled person is probably not what you need. You know?
Yeah, because we don't really know what we need, and I'm all for the individual because we do live in the context of the one and the many, right? And I think if we lose that context, we lose personal responsibility to a certain extent.
Yeah.
We are personally responsible for our lives, or we should be. Yeah.
I think, and to just add to y'all's point, I think a lot of people might really want strong communities, so you don't have to do as much. You can just be a part of something. But I think also a lot of people have this feeling like I have to wait to start something, or I have to become a better person, even to be in a relationship. And to some degree, that's true if you really are struggling. But this concept of I have to, you know, bury my dead first and then I can come, instead of just willing to go for things, I think is probably also a weakness a lot of people struggle with, you know. Like I need to get in shape first before I can talk to a girl, or I need to be a likable guy before I make a bunch of friends, or, you know, and I think and I think also, even with depression, a lot of that, just how McMo was talking about serving others, if you can just keep your mind from hogging the mic, like your sadness, your depression, if you could just give someone else, I mean, as small a level as that, and let them have the mic and talk about their, you know, issues. Mm-hmm. And I'll love to hear y'all's opinion on that. But first, I think it will help a lot with depression and ideation. And for me, I think also with dating, I know it's not really all about dating, but I think there is the entitlement you were talking about, Sherry, where it's like, last night I did go on a date, and it was pretty cool. But then I'm not 100% on this girl, and that's a personal thing, I guess. But so later I go to this other place, and I was just sad because, you know, I liked this other girl, and she liked me for a little bit, gave me her phone number, but then she moved on to some other guy. And admittedly, if that happened in the same like place, you'd probably feel sad too. But and I remember being so sad about it, and I was just thinking like there was someone else who wanted to be with me. You know, how entitled am I to complain that, you know, I'm alone when like I did the same thing to somebody else? And I think a lot of entitlement, and I apologize for talking too much, is just feeling like you deserve a lot more instead of being grateful for what you have.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Emily says doing service is a good cure for selfishness, and I say amen to that. Yep.
All of that stuff is fine. But there are other things, more, let's say, basic things, that sometimes get confused with that. There are some matters that are not about feeling fulfilled with life or not being sad. I think there is a framing mistake here. I don't think there is such a thing as an individual. I think the minimum unit is the family. And if you have
Yeah, but what's family made up of, Nick?
well, what is the body made out of?
Right.
Parts.
Yes.
And if I cut my arm off, then my arm dies because it's separated from the body.
Sure.
And the arm is one member of the family. This is another member of the family.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that the arm doesn't have its own. It's not autonomous from the rest of the body, right? This is why St. Paul says, not everyone is a hand, not everyone is a foot, right? We all have our particular purposes in the world.
Autonomous means that it moves on its own. If I cut it off, it doesn't move anymore.
Right. Okay, so so I used the wrong word. Sorry about that.
But I think it was a salient mistake, because I think that's the problem. That I think what happens to lonely people is that they are like legs that have been cut off from the body. They no longer receive blood, and that's what happens to them. I hear a lot of time people say that.
That's right, Matthew.
People
We're both right.
Jump off of rooftop because they can't handle the pain. No, I don't think that's true. I think it's more like it's because they are like a flopping hand that's fallen on the ground and it's running out of blood. At least for a lot of cases nowadays. I don't think it's a matter of pain or feeling sad or not fulfilled. I think what people call depression is not really depression. It's more like an arm that doesn't have blood. That's my idea.
Like it's more of like missing something that you've always wanted.
Well, it can be.
It
can be. I mean, loneliness can be the source of depression, but so can a chemical imbalance in your brain, right? Like we're just so much more complex than I think, Nick, that you're proposing.
There's probably like a 50-50. But actually, Nick, I think it's interesting too, because I love community. I really wouldn't call myself, you know, someone who needs a lot of it, but I do love to be a part of it. And I think as a younger person, it's hard because you look to the past and you want to be a part of all those communities. But a lot of those communities broke down because of corruption, you know. And so I guess the proposal, and I'll leave that to y'all, is maybe something we could do is like, it seems like you're supposed to join an almost corrupted or a broken community and pour into it, even knowing that there's issues, instead of restarting once constantly. But it just seems like a lot of the issues, as a young person, you're kind of dealing with things that are a lot older than you. And it's like you can start anew, or you can go back and try to fix some of the stuff that's been broken. And that's maybe how you get community. I don't know. What do you guys think? Does that kind of add anything, Nick?
I think community is just another name for family. It's just that what people call really big families, families that are so big that people don't completely know each other. And I think they work in the same way. Community usually is just given. One community comes out of the other. But essentially, as far as I know, a community starts when a spirit descends from heaven. Because each community is a spirit. I think Constantinople was founded like that. They made a ritual, and Constantine went around the center and then founded the city. It was something like that. And the reason why we can even talk to each other is because a spirit did descend, that was PBK, and he created it. So essentially, if you want to create a community, you have to find a way to do kind of the same thing. Have a center around which people gather. And in normal families, like 4 people families that exist, that's the family dinner. Family dinner is actually a religious ritual where you worship the family. And every time you do it, you reinforce the family, and that helps it remain together.
Yeah. And you have to do it even if your family makes you upset. Because I think my family has very strong bonds, especially my immediate one. And I have friends who kind of aren't the best in terms of their family. But for me, a lot of it is just not giving up even when they are annoying or mean. And
Young God makes a really good point. You just need honest interaction, and community will percolate from there. And I think that's true. And one of the things that, honest, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's what Jordan Peterson is talking about when he says tell the truth, or at least don't lie, right?
It's true. It's true. But the thing is, how do you get that starting? Like, from where comes the first honest
it starts
interaction?
From the individual. Back to McMo's.
Yep. when one family loves another family very much,
they make more families.
Yeah.
That's the Spartans. The Spartans did that. And they joined 2 tribes together. They did a sort of tribal marriage.
Yeah,
I think the 2 big communities joined.
The thing that's popping up for me, in response to what you originally laid out, Aaron, is the idea that there are no unbroken communities. Much like marriages, as soon as you're in one, you start to see all the cracks. And maybe you can, yeah, Mark Parker said it. And so all you're really left to do, I think, is to be a peacemaker, is to try to mend some of those cracks. And sometimes people just need to leave, and that's just the truth.
Yeah.
But yeah, you
sons of God.
Say again?
Well, everything, all communities are broken because all individuals are.
If you have,
like, we are broken as human beings, right?
In the Beatitudes, it says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be sons of God.
Yeah.
I didn't want to cut you off. Yeah, and I guess not a pivot, but just maybe something to ask is like, have any of y'all had any experience with community growing or being a part of any of that?
Yes.
Yep.
And how did that go?
Horribly wrong.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
it was amazing, but yeah, it ended up it wasn't the end of my story, but it was, yeah, it was invigorating. It was exciting. It felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I felt the hand of God's good grace upon me and the people I interacted with every day. So yeah, it was like the best drug in the world. But that can't last, and there's reasons why we actually, so I worked for a megachurch, Aaron, and there was a time we grew so fast that we had to hire like 3 or 4 new pastors. One of them was kind of supposed to be kind of like an executive pastor in the sense that he had experience in business, and he kind of one day basically said that he had never seen growth like this in any arena ever. We went from like 200 people to like 1,000 people in like a year or two. And so we were constantly talking about the rocket ship and how we were repairing the rocket ship as we went along. But nobody had the guts to kind of pump the brakes or to hit the brakes because we all felt like it was God's doing. Why would we be having success as a church if we weren't doing the right things? And so it was a very tricky situation. It was very complex problems, and it became very difficult over time to do what Sherry was talking about, which is or what Yanga was talking about, which was to speak honestly. It just became much easier to either ignore things that made you uncomfortable or to say things in a way that would, not ruffle feathers. And there's a time for that. You don't want to always be the rudest person in the room.
Yeah.
But it kind of, well, I mean, I don't have to tell the rest of the story. That you can basically see where some of the issues would start arising. But yeah, I would be interested in hearing because I think Tayo said he's been a part of a growing community. I hope he wasn't just talking about this one.
Tyler's been trying to build actual community for a long time.
This community does not exist. Remember that.
So I don't know if he's actually in the process of doing that or not.
Well, I said Tayo, not Tyler. But yeah, I know Tyler.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I thought you were talking about Tyler.
Well, I have a dream to always like mix all my friend groups. And I'm always hesitant to do that, but that's my dream of like, because most people do complain about the loneliness. But then I think they're kind of like indoor cats where
That's a good one.
they really enjoy their safety. And maybe not safety, but they don't like being vulnerable.
And to Matthew's point, if I can find it, we are very individualistic because of the success of our family/community. I think there's some truth to that, depending on what you mean by success.
Yeah, well, the success, you could frame it like this. You could say, because we don't have to work together in the field, right? Now we can just go to the grocery store and get our vegetables. We don't really need each other. Like earlier in the chat, I wrote, when you run a farm, marriage takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
I'll be really honest. There was times where I just wanted to slam the door and walk away from my marriage. But if I did that, who's going to fix my fences? Honestly, those were the thoughts. and it pulls you back in, which is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. It's really easy for people to slam the door and walk away.
Yeah.
They have their own income. They have the grocery store. They've got a car. They have a mechanic. They don't need each other, actually.
And if there is one valid criticism to Protestantism, I think that's the one. Is maybe they quit too early. But, you know, asking talking about McMo, about your not having the bravery or the guts to talk about issues, I think.
Oh, I had the bravery. That was one of the reasons they fired me.
Oh, okay. What does Jesus say? Those who will lose their life for the sake of mine will find it. That's what that sounds like. Those who covet their life will lose it.
Libas, what do you mean by an involuntary aspect?
Well, you know, I could take it the full Reformed route and say maybe he's talking about like the divine hand of God that's always at work.
Providence.
Providence.
I don't know why
Yeah.
people call that a Protestant idea, but whatever.
Well, it's
Haven't figured that one out.
yeah, I think it's because it's kind of related to Calvinism and salvation by grace alone, right? That it's and determinism, double predestination, those kind of ideas kind of fall under that, taking providence to the extreme, maybe.
Yeah, but that version of Providence sounds more like fate to me. But anyway.
Well, there's also the aspect of like, which is maybe where I would lean into what Phlebas said, which is the sense that like, it's kind of always, there's always a level of the involuntary to it, right? There's always aspects of it that you didn't know you signed up for.
Of course.
And that's true. And that's true of marriage, friendship, community, family, all of it. And so there's a willingness, or there should be maybe a willingness to enter into some of those. Well, I guess another way to put it is like anything that's involuntary often breeds kind of conflict, right? Like there's a sense in which, well, if I had chosen this, we wouldn't be disagreeing, kind of a thing. If I had my druthers, we'd all agree. But who's this Jonathan character? Ah, my favorite Jonathan, Dumir.
Jonathan got a haircut.
Looking snazzy, man.
Extreme Jonathan. Thank you.
The
What up,
relief
Tyler?
of you not being a troll is almost as powerful as just the good feelings of seeing your face, buddy.
No trolls allowed. What's up? How's it going? I didn't catch too much of the stream before this. I know y'all are talking about community.
Yeah, so it started off, Luke was talking about a specific type of therapy, and it involved kind of a radical acceptance and a attention towards listening without judging. And then Rod got on, and so they were talking a little bit about that. And then Chad got on and talked about how he saw a road that was black, but it looked white to him. And if someone was blind and they had just received sight, the road would be white, but he knew it was black. And then Luke had to go, and Chad had to go, and then me and Tayo hopped on, and we talked to Rod about marriage and the marriage crisis and how hard and difficult it is to find a mate. And so that led us to a conversation on community. How do we build community? How do you find community when you're single? How do you interact with community? Is family? Nico brought up the point that maybe individuals don't exist, but just families. And then Sherry was just talking about how basically being married on a farm introduces this type of things that are kind of out of your control that you actually need your partner for. So if Sherry would have left her husband, then nobody would be there to fix her fences. And that's basically when you hopped on, I think.
Heard that. Thanks for the summary.
I don't know if that's all I said, but
No, it's not. That is the abridged version, and I probably left out the best
it
parts.
makes me sound a little bit too pragmatic.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'm with that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, people are. That reminds me of Grimgriz's thing with the cell. You know, everyone's in their cells, cell phones, so people don't hold up. People don't actually have to like collaborate. Hold up.
Yeah.
Well, you know, my wife actually does this to me often. She'll call me, and then she'll be like, "Hold on,
I'm back. That was the end of my thought, though. Just that when our, it's funny. That was my mom, and asking if I will be joining in the human IRL activities, and I said probably not today. How poignant. But yeah, it's kind of that's a danger which I think is worth pointing out. That like, when we abstract from the embodied world, then everything goes wrong. I don't know.
There are a few comments that I've started I wanted to go through. Fleabers, Cassandi, and a few others talking about if communities are voluntary or involuntary. And it reminded me of Boss's comments in the estuary thing we had, where he was making the point that communities and are being thought of as identities that can be worn and taken off, which makes it sound like communities are involuntary. What do y'all think of?
Can I just say, I have to go soon, so I just want to say I think a lot of the critiques that are popping up, even in the conversation, but also in the chat, it's a real binary way to look at things. It's either or, right? What about both and? Like, you can move away into a more solitary life. Like this is, for me, this is what the seasons are, right? There's a time for everything. And sometimes we need that quietness. Sometimes it goes longer than expected. Sometimes we need community. Sometimes that goes longer than expected. But if we force ourselves into these binary, this binary way of thinking, then we're actually going to stay in those places longer than we should. If the Tao is something, it's a flow, right? It's moving us into all kinds of landscapes all the time. And as long as we remain open to that, I think we remain healthy. Nothing is forever. Let me just say that nothing is forever. And it's much easier to be grateful for where you are and what you find yourself doing at the moment, when you know that it's, hell. The whole idea of hell is that it's forever. And I think it's possible that because of that concept, we get paralyzed by fear, the fear of something being forever.
Yeah.
And I know I've been in really, really difficult places and really painful places, and they got more difficult and more painful when I believed that they were going to last forever.
Wow.
Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, even marriage has a cutoff date, till death do we part.
Right. Right. And somehow we have to embrace the moment. Like, and I don't mean that as in revel and roll in it like a dog in shit or something. Nothing like that.
Drats, that's exactly what I wanted to do.
I mean, sometimes we do that, right? Because we get it wrong, but we learn from our mistakes. So even that is okay in my books. But if we can learn to, I always think about it this way: pick the thing up and closely examine it. What is this? Dare I say, abstract it away from ourselves for a minute. Get a third person perspective and not a first person perspective. And then practice gratitude. no matter how difficult it is. No matter how difficult it is, practice gratitude. Say thank you for whatever it is that you're holding in your hand, right? And then expect a good thing, because God is good. Okay? So, like, yeah, that's kind of what I want to leave the chat with is just try to stay away from the binary. You know, it's either this or that. It's either in a monastery or a community. There's no such thing as an individual. That's just bullshit. There is such thing as an individual. I'm sorry. If there wasn't such a thing as a cell in my body, I wouldn't be held together by anything. Okay?
The cell is a person, not
there is an
an
individual.
individual.
There is an individual and there is community. There is an individual, there is the particular, and there is the one. And that is a beautiful thing if you can understand it properly. And on that note, I'll say ciao.
Bye, Sherry.
Bye, Sherry. Praise God.
Bye.
Bye.
Jonathan, what are your, I don't think we've actually maybe ever talked about this. Do you believe in the individual, or would your kind of preferences be, so Nico had earlier stated that he tends to think of it more as there are no individuals, there are families, and that the smallest kind of unit of assessment should be the family. Is that kind of what you were talking about, Nico? And family can also be friends in Nico's model, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, I would count
Nice to meet you,
friends
Nico.
as part of the family.
Nice to meet
Hey,
you, by the
Jonathan.
way. Sorry to interrupt.
And just one little detail. When I say there is no individuals, I don't mean there is like a component part. I would call that a person. I notice in the Anglophone world, people use the word individual a lot. Over here, it's person. People say person. I think a person is like my finger or my hand or my lungs or my heart. But none of these things that I just gave as an example could live without being attached together. That's my point.
So I guess the question would be for you, Jonathan, because, I think I've said enough in this stream, but also to you that, I put great value on the individual, and I can use the person too. That's probably a better way to do it anyway. But yeah, the person, because the person is who is judged by God, basically, and who God has a relationship with. Although he does have relationships with, nations and families and the whole world or whatever. But I tend to focus my attention on, I focus most of my attention on myself. But no, I mean that I think that I guess my contention would be that the individual or the person is not given enough attention in these types of conversations. And that includes kind of the idea of personal responsibility, but also, the insistence, I guess, that you exist, you matter, you individually, you uniquely, and that we're not just kind of parts of a giant cyborg with no individuality or uniqueness. But it, it's not a necessarily. I don't mean to say that it's an easy. Certainly not a binary, as Sherry just kind of cautioned us in thinking, but that maybe maybe the best way to put it would be, you need to start with yourself as an individual and move out from there, rather than starting from any greater point and going down or something.
And you know why? It has to do with authority. Because suppose something happened politically. There is a janitor in the White House. Would you blame the janitor for something political that happened in the U.S.? No, because it's the janitor. What's he going to do about it? So you, as a person, only have authority over the things that are below you. So it would be a little strange for you to be wondering about the things that are above you. You can't change those things. That's why that happens.
All right, I have a bunch of thoughts. All right, so I like the distinction between, or I like just bringing up the fact that, terminology is important here in the sense that, like, maybe there is a distinction between individual and person, and like maybe we like maybe there's different meanings of different readings of what the word individual means. Like I know for Jung it was more something that like almost an individual is like the goal of personhood, such that there are one might say that there's never been a true individual besides Christ or something, such that persons and individuals are different. Perhaps that's one thing that comes to mind. I like that distinction that you made, Nick. Another thing that comes to mind is Steiner talking about the 4 levels of the human being, such that people have been. I was just talking about this with Mo recently, about the evolution of consciousness or humanity, such that people used to be more enmeshed in their tribal societies and would be kind of have a more dreamlike consciousness where they were part of a collective more so, and they didn't really have an experience of this unique ego consciousness. But eventually that happened, and that actually he framed it as that kind of severed us from the spiritual world, this kind of closed off ego. And then he would say that the Christ event is what kind of reopened us to the spiritual world without diminishing our eyes, such that it would be like you have personal consciousness, but also you're open to these wider, aspects of reality. So that, and in that context, he would say that in the second coming of Christ, and just in general, he said that going forward, communities were not about tribal identities or anything, but it was about, people coming together based on their own individual, quote unquote, individual interests. Like basically, the second thing that I'm pointing to here is this thing where I do think there is a danger in reverting to kind of a tribal way of looking at things. That I think there's something very important about like the personal being. I almost think of it as the evolution of the first person perspective or something like that. But anyway, moving on. There's another one. You were talking about how authority of things below you. I would suggest that there are people who kind of transcend to higher, like you shall judge the angels and you shall be as gods. Is Peugeot talks about it as like people become principles which other people kind of orient around, and like people have authority given to them from above, and they become kind of this higher thing. So, and even just side to side, you could think about it that you do influence the world, through your own actions and stuff. So that's another thing. I think I had one more, but those are kind of my general thoughts. I guess in terms of like, I don't like the framing of does the individual exist, because I think it's kind of like what Nick said, where it's kind of a terminological thing to some extent. Like I like the idea that persons exist, and some people would say that my hand does have like a personhood, but I don't know. That's a interesting.
I could give a funny example.
Sure.
About that. You could take those same thoughts and send them in the opposite direction. And also, by what McMahon said, consider, for example, the desires of your lungs. What do your lungs want? Maybe your lungs want something that it's not the same thing that you want. We are always thinking of the freedom of us against the world, but what about the freedom of the things that are below us, against us? If I go like this, who just breathed in? Me or my lungs? Who took the action? If I'm running somewhere and then I don't, I'm really exercising a lot, and I'm trying to bring down but my lungs don't obey me. I want my lungs to breathe slower, and yet they don't do it. They don't do that. And if I'm going underwater and I want to hold my breath, I'm trying to hold it and at some point, my lungs, they do their own thing. So who takes the action? And the thing about the non-binary, it applies over here, down here too. So don't get too comfortable with the individual talk, because it goes below too.
I kind of see what you're saying. Like, just, I don't know. I think this is kind of this is like a fundamental spiritual impulse, is like to recognize that, there are not these hard distinctions between beings, that we exist as conglomerations of beings, and there's higher beings that we're part of. I think that, like Sherry was saying, it is like kind of a balance of being able to recognize kind of both of those things, that you can have unity and multiplicity, in that, like, in the in the manifold uniqueness, that it's kind of through that I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, like, are you trying to say, are you trying to suggest that, like, the lungs do not exist as a distinct, organ?
Well, I'm trying to say the opposite, that they do exist as a distinct. If you want to call, let's say, us individuals, well, then you kind of have to call the lungs an individual too.
Yeah,
because
again, I think the individual thing is really just the wording, I like I mean, yeah.
Can we really
what's kind of
exist?
What's kind of bugging you about it? Like, is it just that people forget about the?
This is the thing that bugs me about it. What I see is that we really are in a lot of trouble, and good-meaning people are kind of making things worse. For example, in the Discord, sometimes, and in other places, I see, let's say you have a Christian couple that have kids. So the mother, let's say, goes in the Discord and asks, what kind of dating advice could you give me so I can help my kid? Suppose they live in a desert Iceland. No individual advice is going to be of any use, because dating is like giving a handshake. It doesn't belong to any one individual. And if you live on a desert island, or you live in a metropolis with millions and millions of people, that none of them, not only they don't know what a handshake is, but they dread the idea. that kid, even if you teach them how to do a handshake, they will hardly be able to do a handshake with any other person that's over there, because it's a thing that doesn't. It's above the individual. So people I see all the time trying to fix problems at the individual level, when sometimes, just like the handshake, it's not at the individual level, and in many cases it's not a good idea to approach it like that.
I understand that. Yeah, maybe we could like say something along the lines of like Peterson's advice to start with the individual. I mean, would you say like maybe some examples? Like I don't know. I think we can all acknowledge that like there are certain things that do require a more, stand back, look at the, like take a more collective approach or something. But I don't know, maybe even in those instances it's still like you're the one doing that personally. But like even addressing things at a non-individual level, like trying to, so didn't you say just before though that it was kind of that it's not good if people just try to mess with the things above them? So like, are you suggesting maybe rather than at an individual level addressing problems or something, and rather than looking up, like we look at the baseline or something? I'm kind of
well, it's two separate things, and you're pointing at the right thing. It's really this problem. It's above any of us, and the solution would have to come from somebody who has more authority in the group than any of us. It's more over there from where the solution has to come. But sometimes when you are below.
Hold on a sec. So it sounds to me like if in the scenario you laid out, the problem of the handshake, sounds like you're saying the solution to teaching, to helping this person on island learn to shake hands with different tribes that they encounter would have to be the individual has to join a tribe rather than
yeah.
So
okay, yeah. So we're talking about like rather than like trying to solve your problems by yourself, by like saying that some things are not really addressed in that way. Like there are things that are the kind of solutions to these things are more diffuse. Like is that kind of like joining a church, for example? Like
or create one. If that can be done.
Create a community.
Can we create a community?
Can an individual create a community?
In a way, I think it can be done, because at least partially, wasn't this all created by PVK and maybe Peterson, but at least in a way.
I did catch a little bit when I was talking about like how the spirit starts it, and then Sherry mentioned honest communication, and that's kind of like one might say that maybe like Paul Vanderklay was like embodying the spirit of honest communication or something, such that like the spirit that starts communities is the spirit of God ultimately or something, and it's like that is manifest through individuals. That seems right.
And after Paul did that, then Chad's channel and Luke's channel also did that. So once you know the method, it can happen again.
You say it can't happen again, or it can happen again?
Can.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't see why not. I imagine why, like, yeah, I imagine similar things could pop, like let's say in China or something, like in China, if somebody, there might be a Chinese PVK out there, who knows?
Yeah, Nick, I'm still not convinced by the argument you're laying out about the problem is solving at the community level, not at the individual level. And I think it's because we're not, like, the problem that I'm trying to solve is my sin, quite frankly. It's like my my disobedience of God's commandments, me going back to that fruit tree of good of knowledge again and again, 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 and again, again, again. And there's a sense in which the story, like, it starts with literally the, like, my heart getting softened. That's the project I'm working on. If the project was trying to save Western civilization, sure, maybe communities, find a tribe, all of that, but that's not the project I'm on.
I think I might be missing some context from earlier in the stream or something. Like, so are you like thinking about starting a new community or something, Nick, or like or you're just talking about like people who are like, is there a problem that we're trying to address, or is it just kind of like discussing the principles of how these things work? Or
I think that the original problem we were trying to address was like relationships and like finding a mate for the rest of your life. And as is my usual spiel, I was kind of like, God's given you particular gifts and skills and talents and sins, and you just need to do your best with those, regardless of if you're single or married. And I think that Nico is trying to make the case that no man is an island, basically. That there's always this factor of connection and needing a context and needing a space to be. I think Nico even said at one point that an individual on his own basically will die. And there's obvious,
like the self is relational, one might say.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's I think part of the conversation has been trying to figure out to what extent we're actually disagreeing or agreeing. I do think that Nick's kind of strong stance on the family being the primary locus of action maybe was somewhat novel. But also, I'm in the back of my mind right now, I'm wondering why Parlato got so pissed and had to leave.
I missed that part. I totally missed that.
I missed that in the comments. Where was that?
It was a while back.
I mean, if the question is, how to find a wife and stuff, well, for one, I don't know how much advice I can offer here, but for two, it seems like it would definitely be a combination of both. It's becoming your ideal self is on the one hand, and second, it's, participating in that which is beyond you, right? Beyond quote unquote you, like expanding the boundaries of yourself, and not in like a consuming everything way, but in like a, in like an agape way, like a spiritual way. Be like, yes, we are all connected, and I care about you because ultimately we are one, or something like that. Like, obviously I'm oversimplifying here, but it's just because, like, I don't know, so many people don't see that, that like you can really, and it's not just I'm going to get a wife by helping my community, but it's not, it's like to be self-sacrificial is the way to be glorified, like is the way to, glory, usually includes like the blessings of God, which would probably be like a wife and such,
Nick, is this your solution to the marriage problem?
Yeah, basically, that's in all communities there has always been a ritual for finding a wife or something, a story, something like that. And if you don't have one of those, then it's just the law of the jungle. And there used to be one in the secular world, more or less. And if you go to, let's say that your community is your church, maybe they tell you the things you don't have to do, like having sex before marriage. But what's the ritual for finding a wife in that community? No, there is none. They will just go extinct. I was watching the Basecamp channel, and Malcolm said that the reason for the low fertility rates in Catholic countries is because they are Catholic. And I think he's right. The people who are at the top of the hierarchy, it's their business what goes on below. And in the Catholic world, and in many other worlds, nobody thinks it's their business what happens below, except for Bill Gates. Bill Gates thinks it's really good that people be alone and never get married. He does think about that, and he takes action. But in the Christian world, I don't see an anti-Bill Gates.
Do you think there might be an issue with the head of the authority, the top of the hierarchy, being a single person?
Ooh,
he said the thing.
No. The Pope
We
is
don't do
not.
that here.
No.
Yep.
You're watching the.
Saint Paul was a father, and it's a father. It's a family. The people who go to the church are the kids to the priest. The priest is their father, as in literal father. It's a literal family, and it's the literal father. And
I would say it's not literal. It is dysfunctional and often abusive, and in that regard, it is quite like a normal family.
Yeah,
that's true.
But also, Catholicism, despite the stereotype, is not a monolith, right? Like every parish has a different flavor from every congregation all the way up to the country, all the way up to Rome. So, yeah, I'm not meaning in my joking to necessarily try to convert you out of Catholicism. I obviously think that Catholicism is great if done well. But I do think what
turns into Catholicism, so it's fine. We'll take 5 minutes to try converting back out of Catholicism.
That's true. That is true.
Maybe you could. One thing I've noticed in the Protestant world is that because you don't have that huge structure, the vertical structure, there is a lot of more effort in community building in the Catholic world and in the Protestant world, and evangelizing. People really sit down to think about this stuff. And in the Catholic world, it's somebody else's problem further up the chain. And so people get kind of lazy and they don't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the similarity. I see that same similarity writ large over the whole population with our kind of difference in the individual versus the family or community, right? Like you've got this, if you're always kind of thinking that you're a small part of this bigger thing that you have very little control over, then there's always somebody to pass the buck to, right? It's the bishop's fault I can't find a girlfriend is kind of would be the stereotype, right? Like, and so I do think that's why like we've kind of wanted to push back a little bit on the family thing, because there is, like Tayo was saying, there's a rubber that meets the road at the point of my life that was given to me by God that I have to serve him with. And so I can't just kick the ball down the road in that regard, or look upwards towards authority in every respect. I still have to take responsibility. It's not even that I take the responsibility. I have the responsibility. I have to, steward it basically. So I think that, but I also want to acknowledge and appreciate that, like, I do think you're onto something, and maybe Jonathan's synthesis is the correct one, in which, it's kind of this both and I guess this is Sherry's too, but this kind of expansion of how do we see ourselves, and two, to take in your critique of, like, what level is this problem at, like, to a certain extent, like, there's very few things I could imagine of doing right now in this moment to, like, end the war in Gaza or whatever. Like, there are things that are above my pay grade. Just like there are a few.
I said
Go
you
ahead.
could do it, Mo. I was muted. I'm muted, man.
Guys, stop it right now.
Stop doing that.
Everybody stop doing that over there. Spread the word. Everyone stop with the doing what you're doing, and do something else. Do something good for once.
Do something better.
I do have to go. I don't know if anyone else can keep this going, but it's been nearly 4 hours. I think that was a nice synthesis. To be fair, we came to a natural end. Thanks everyone in the chat. Thank you to Luke, Sherry, everyone that came on. Peace.
I'm leaving as well. Bye, everyone.
I want to say one last thing, just because it's on the tip of my tongue, which is that I think maybe like an expansion of what we think about as the ritual of the church, like where the doing of the ritual maybe like pervades out into all the essence, like the aspects of life, such that like going to the coffee hour after and talking with ladies is all part of the ritual. It's all for the glory of God, such that one's whole life becomes this liturgical act. I don't go to church very like so. I mean, but I would imagine that would help me find a girlfriend. Like if I really participated in the true meaning of like to live a liturgical life or something. And that would
You could try it out.
that would include like having, in my opinion, that would include stuff like having a Michaelmas party at my house. Like this whole. I think the idea that we don't have like the vast rituals that are conducive towards bringing people together anymore. I think that's definitely true. Like to have the festivals, the seasonal festivals. Yeah. That's all I had to say.
Nick, any final words?
I want to tell a funny anecdote, and the thing about what you said, Jonathan. If you have a context in which to go to participate in the ritual. So some time ago, I was a long time ago, when I was in school, I went on a vacation with my family near the mountains, and a man who was from a tribe from over there, and that I think he was selling berries or something, came up to my dad, and he asked my dad if he would like to marry my sister to his son. Of course, my dad said no. I think we find ourselves in a bit in that problem. That man could be there and ask every single dad he comes across if they would like to marry their daughter to his son, but it's not going to work, because there is a thing that needs to happen for that to work. That's the little missing piece, I think.
Yeah, that something about the individualism does seem out of place. Like there, in the sense where like we do have a very romanticized vision of I'm going to find the perfect person, and like it's going to be like there is I think we do often overlook like the more practical. It's like there is no greater thing that you can do for your overall health and life expectancy than to have a intimate marriage. Like or a close to have a healthy marriage. And it's like, that type of thing, like even arranged marriages, I'm not, that's a little too far in my opinion, but like I think I still have my individualism, like, or whatever we want to call it. But I definitely think that that's what you're saying there makes sense, such that like it's become a little bit fantastical rather than like, rather than these kind of more established ways of getting people together.
Yeah, but if everybody believed in that thing of that you said that, oh, I'm gonna find the one, that maybe it would work because everybody believes it. It has to be shared. But what happens when everybody believes all sorts of things that don't match with each other?
Yep. Yep.
And with that, the stream was done.
Yep. Glory be to God, blessings. May we all find wives if we haven't already.